now. I'm talking about capacities at the next level." That was his reply. Bryony glanced at Elsingham to see how he was managing with the notes, then pressed on. "Finch had no connection to the university?" "Not in Oxford. He'd been to several universities abroad. He despised English education. His idea of teaching was something quite different. On the night of the lecture he talked for an hour and a half at least, without a break, and every one of us was totally absorbed. It was stuff I'd heard bits of before, all about the will. He's got this theory that you have to find your true will, because that's the only law in your life. What do you most want to know? That makes the centre of your mental universe, so all your other knowledge revolves around it, like the planets. He said a lot of things about removing the obstacles, clearing the mind. But instead of the concentration exercises he used to give me, he put those kids into a trance, all of them at once. For some reason it didn't work on me, but I had the instinct to pretend that it did, because this was starting to put the wind up me, the way he was talking to them. It was what you'd call a visualization to begin with. You know, the kind of thing they do in meditation classes. Imagine a landscape with trees and a lake and all that. They were to walk through this place till they came to a portal framed by 3 ancient stones, 2 upright and 1 across the top. But at the base of the portal was a black strip of nothingness, the space between the living and the dead. Cross the threshold, he told them, to the place you were in before you were conceived, and the place you'll be in after your death. Look, I can't say any more about that scene. Those students were in deep, really deep. It was a horrible atmosphere. And I sat there and I thought, this isn't about their will. It's about his will. It's a total power trip. Donnelly was scratching nervously at his forearm. "Could we leave the rest of this to another time?" he said. "We could, but our investigation has taken an urgent turn. What you have to say might help to save lives." She poured him a glass of water, and he took several gulps. I was in a turmoil about how to handle my next meeting with Finch, but I needn't have agonized. Soon as he saw me, he said, "There are obstructions for you. You need to take a different way." He took me into a room where I'd never been before. It was full of pictures and statues, including the statue of Pan in the middle, with a giant priapus. I knew better than to ask any questions. He opened a drawer in a locked cabinet and brought out a little metal box with some white powdery stuff in it, wrapped in plastic. Cocaine. Snow, he called it. I was so wet behind the ears at that time I didn't even know what it could be, but it was the purest white substance I've ever seen. I could see he was entranced by it. He handled it as if he was in love with it, shaking off a minute amount onto a polished wooden dish. He handed that to me, and a narrow cylinder of dark wood, hollow in the middle like a straw. I was to close off one nostril and inhale the powder through the other. It was as if the world I was living in had doubled in size. Everything seemed filled with a new significance. He gave me a dose of the snow 2 or 3 times a week, always measured exactly. I saw things, shining beings standing in the corners of rooms, shadowy shapes lurking next to doorways or even at the side of the road. Then one day I had a vision, in the upstairs room at his place. A shadow grew against the wall and became solid. Then it led me off, through the woods and down into a cave under a great tree. It seemed totally real to me in there. I could smell the place, earthy and cold, and I saw stuff. Some wild figure that looked like Pan was picking people up and ripping their heads off, carrying them round, swinging them by the hair, then smashing them to pieces. All kinds of people, even children. I could see the fear on their faces as he approached them. I could feel their fear. The next morning I was walking over Magdalen Bridge towards the tower, and I saw a bird fall from the top. I stopped in my tracks and I watched it. It landed a couple of yards in front of me, stone dead. It felt like the vision I'd had was starting to invade the real world. I went to Finch and told him I didn't want any more of the snow. I didn't want any more dark visions ever again. He was contemptuous. Darkness and light, he said, are the sources of power. You must know both. The cave of darkness is a test, an enlargement of being. If you can't pass that test, our work is at an end. And that was it. I thanked him for the lessons, and I said I didn't know how I could ever repay him. I meant it. It was wonderful what I learnt. He laughed and said, "Obligation is a sacred bond. When I need something of you, I'll ask for it." He sent me a congratulations card after I got a first in my finals. After that, I heard nothing from him for the next few years. I went to London and studied at the Tavistock Clinic. I was still pretty screwed up, and they gave me a lot of help as well as good training. I learned how to use hypnotism for therapeutic purposes. Of course, clinical psychology doesn't recognise it as a form of treatment, but I didn't want to be a clinician. I went back to Oxford to work as a counsellor and joined the Problem Clinic in 1968. Soon after I started working there, I got a call from someone called James Edwards. He said he'd been there at the Second Sight meeting, but I didn't remember him. He said Finch had a favour to ask me. He wanted me to see a new patient who was a member of the group. That was Claire Belmont. She came the next day, looking a bit tired and stressed, but otherwise she seemed to be pretty together compared with some of my other patients. Then I put her under hypnosis, and all this talk came out, in a voice very different from her normal way of speaking, different rhythms and intonations. All it talked about was death. The death of this person and that, people she knew who were walking around very much alive at the time. It was as if she was predicting their death, or even wishing it on them. When I brought her back to consciousness, I told her I thought she had a visitor. It was Finch's term for a spirit that channeled through you. She stayed very calm. "Then no more hypnosis," she said. "I need to get back in control." And she did. She went and joined some other group that does meditation and cut her ties with Second Sight. Claire's an extraordinary person. She'd always been psychic, and she just took it as something she had to learn to manage. Luckily for her, she hadn't got too close to Finch. What was his reputation with women? Donnelly glanced at Bryony. Supposed to have been extremely promiscuous at one time, but that was before I met him. His interest in Claire wasn't sexual. Why not? Wouldn't most men have that kind of interest in Claire? Of course. But Finch was in total control of himself. Total abstinence. He told me about it once. Called it reversal of sex magic. Sex magic? Some members of the Golden Dawn movement practiced it, like Aleister Crowley, and Finch's own father, who was a disciple of Crowley's for a while. Who's Aleister Crowley? He called himself a student of magic. The tabloids called him the wickedest man in England. Some people think he actually started Second Sight in 1905. Let's get back to Claire. Why was Finch interested in her, then? He was drawn to anyone with psychic abilities, but he also went warily with them if he thought they were special talents. He never closed in too fast, and sometimes, if they had trouble, he'd just withdraw and leave them alone. Further questions were gathering in Bryony's mind. Then why did he send her to you? It was a way of letting me know I was still part of his sphere of operation, on call, under obligation, and also a way of ensuring that a valuable talent like Claire didn't go under before he'd had a chance to see what she could do. I was sure he'd want to pick up on her again later, and on me. James Edwards referred 2 more people to me over the next year, both from Second Sight. It was his recruiting ground, I realized, and Edwards was one of his talent spotters. Both of the other patients were in a bad way, cocaine addiction. But why weren't you addicted? Bryony asked. Good question. There's different ways you can take cocaine, and different ways you can prepare it. I was given the best of the best in exactly measured doses. Those 2 poor blokes he sent to me afterwards had been given crap. Filthy, adulterated stuff. Some kind of precipitate Finch had taught them to make and administer for themselves. They were just instruments, so they didn't matter. You see, he put people in categories. I was a student. That was a privileged category to him. He used to say that only 1 in 500 Oxford undergraduates was what he'd call a student. And there's part of Finch that's a genuine teacher. He respected his students, and he didn't mess them about. Then there were the people he called gifts, psychic people. Claire was a gift. I heard him say the greatest gift is a psychic child. The last category was the instrument. Instruments were expendable. He used them for his experiments, then tossed them aside. So you treated these 2 patients? Tried to, but they were too far gone. One had a nasty hysterical episode, did himself some damage, so the Warnfoot took him in. The other one, Terry Gannon, he'd been involved in some crop-circling ritual, where they make a spiral cutting into the centre of the circle, and the last sheaf to be cut is supposed to contain a demon. He believed it. He absolutely bloody believed it. He was off his face on the drug he'd been injecting, and he reckoned he saw the demon and it followed him home. I tried to calm him down, but it didn't work. He was convinced he was still being chased. So convinced, he ran up Magdalen Tower and jumped from the top. Donnelly swallowed the last words and stopped. You must have had to answer some questions about that. He nodded slowly. But I didn't say much. Didn't need to. It was suicide. Looked like a plain, sad story, and my obligation was to let it lie that way. Wasn't your first obligation to your patient? Of course it was. But you don't cross Finch. That's something I was in no doubt about. I wanted an ordinary life. I'd got married and got a nice ordinary job, and that's all I wanted. If shutting up was the price I had to pay for it, I guess I saw it as the penalty for ever having wanted more. And I really thought, after that I might be left alone. Do you know who is involved in this crop-circling business? No, it was one of Finch's interests, that's all I know. So Terry Gannon was the name of the young man who died. And the other one? Adrian Gill. For a moment, Bryony felt the room spinning round her, and had to lean on the desk with her head between her hands to keep steady. You've had no contact with Gill since? None at all. And do you have any phone number or address for James Edwards? Gotta be kidding. So how does Sylvie come into this? That's what I don't understand. She once mentioned Croydon and all my warning lights came on, but then I thought about it and decided it was probably just coincidence. Oxford's a small place, socially. The circles interconnect. After that episode of hers under hypnosis, the coincidence theory was wearing a bit thin, but I couldn't see how there'd be any connection. When she told me about this expedition with Claire, I was worried they'd got mixed up with some game of Finch's, but he tapped the yellow leaflet. If this was a way of referring her to me in the first place, there must be more to it. The smashing up of my office was a message. You wouldn't get more than one warning like that from Finch. I was under surveillance. Still am. Do you have any relatives you could go and stay with? My mother in London. Or my wife's parents in Banbury. Go to Banbury. We'll get a car to take you home now and stay while you pack up. Our resources are overstretched, but the Banbury police will be able to give you 24-hour protection. I suspect Finch's resources are overstretched too, you know. That's my one comforting thought. He used to quote Alistair Crowley's Book of the Law. Let my servants be few and secret. They shall rule the many and the known. He rarely had more than about 3 people close to him at any one time. We'll be taking every precaution. Now, how do we find this house in Boars Hill? It's called Thelema. I don't think it even has a proper address. It's built right back among the trees, but it was closed up years ago. Finch went to live somewhere in Wiltshire. Chapter 28. It's somebody's bedroom, said Miles. The room they were in was smaller than their own bedroom at home, and the bed was made up with pillows, sheets, and blankets. They bounced on it to see who could get closest to the ceiling. Daniel said if Smith came back he would bounce as high as he could and kick him in the head. But Miles knew that Daniel was as scared as he was, and that if Smith came back they would have to stay still and shut up. When you bounced high, you could see out the window. It was nearly dark outside, but the high branches of the trees still showed against the sky.
"If we could jump across to catch those branches," Daniel said, dropping to a sitting position, "we could climb down the tree and get away from here before Smith comes back. What if the visitor's outside? He might be waiting outside for us. Well, we can't stay in this room forever. It's night time now. It's completely night time, and I'm hungry." "So am I," said Miles. "I want macaroni cheese with bubbles on top, and chocolate pudding."
Suddenly there was the noise of a key in the lock. The door opened, and their satchels were thrown inside. The boys kept stock still, holding their breath. But the door closed again, and they heard footsteps walking away. After a minute, Daniel whispered,
"He didn't lock the door."
They sneaked over to it, and Daniel turned the handle very slowly so as not to make a sound. They moved out into the passageway and were edging along towards the staircase when a loud knocking downstairs broke out. They froze, Miles clinging to Daniel's sleeve. The knocking stopped, then started again, then stopped. Daniel went right to the edge of the landing to look through the banisters, but Miles was trying to pull him away.
"It might be the visitor," he whispered.
They went back to the room, closed the door, and waited to hear what would happen next. There were footsteps on the gravel outside, and a voice called out,
"Hey, who's in my room? Is that you, Croydon?"
The boys went to the window and pressed their foreheads against it, but they couldn't see anything below.
"That's not the visitor," said Miles. "It might be a friend of Leonard's. It might be someone who could help us."
They pulled the window up, which was a hard job because it kept getting stuck, but eventually it was high enough for them to put their heads out.
"Who's that?" called the voice.
"Daniel and Miles," said Daniel. "And we want to go home. We came to see Leonard, but he isn't here."
There was no answer, and they heard footsteps running away. But a moment later they heard the front door opening and voices raised in an argument.
"I'm going to see who it is," said Daniel.
Miles followed him out to the landing, where they could see Smith standing on the stairs and another man coming up towards him.
"Gil,"
shouted the man.
"What on earth's going on?"
Smith stood with his arms out, blocking the way.
"What are they doing here?"
asked the man, pointing at Miles and Daniel.
"And where's Croydon?"
"You ask too many questions," Smith said.
"And I want some answers. What are you doing with those kids?"
"Friends of Lenny's." Smith was unbuckling his belt.
"You're mad,"
yelled the man.
"What the fuck are you going to do with them?"
Smith hit him across the face with the belt. Blood sprayed across the wall, and the man made a sort of choking noise and doubled over, shielding his eyes with his hands. Smith grabbed him by the shoulders, spun him round and threw him down the stairs. The boys ran back to the room, shutting the door after them.
"We have to get out," said Daniel, panting for breath. "We have to get out now. We'll have to climb out the window."
They pulled the window further open, but the ground outside was a long way down. They were far too high to jump. Miles was trying to think. He was trying to think of all the stories he knew where someone had escaped, and he remembered something. He started pulling at the bedclothes. The sheets were all caught up in the blankets, and he wanted Daniel to help, but Daniel didn't understand what he was trying to do, and Miles was coughing and wheezing, so he didn't have enough breath to explain. But when he managed to pull one of the sheets free, he dragged it over to the window and tied it to the catch. Now Daniel had got the idea, because he grabbed the second sheet and tied it to the end of the first one. He climbed out of the window first. Miles followed, so they were both clinging to the sheet at the same time, sliding down it in uneven jerks as it began to tear. They dropped to the ground, falling against each other, swathed in cloth. Behind them was a crowd of great black trees, where the visitor was probably hiding. But they had to go in there because there was a sound of footsteps running on gravel, coming round the side of the house towards them. Stepping as quietly as they could, they went on through the trees until they couldn't tell which way they had come. Miles was trying really hard not to cough in case Smith heard the noise.
"We're lost now," whispered Daniel.
He pulled the roll of fishing line from his pocket.
"We should tie this on again."
They had to be careful to walk the same way round the trees now, but it was so dark they stayed right next to each other anyway. After Donnelly left, Bryony had a tense discussion with Elsingham. "I've got a strange feeling I've met this Finch character. If he was middle-aged 15 years ago, he'd be in his 60s now. A bloke that sort of age came up to me in the Avebury Museum. He was keen to give me a lecture on the local mythology."
If he's got those 2 boys, Inspector, if there's even a chance he's got them, we have to track him down now. Like tonight.
"It's not that straightforward. What we can do is get the Wiltshire police to see if they can match him with an address."
We could get a search underway in Boar's Hill, but it wouldn't be easy. That's a very difficult area at night. It's hard enough to find some of those houses, even in broad daylight. The old places are in the middle of the woods. Best we can do is check with the post office whether they deliver to a place called Thelema. At least they start work early in the sorting office.
"Good thinking, Elsingham. What are those notes of yours like?" Elsingham shook his wrist out.
"Enough to give me writer's cramp."
"Enough to make sense to a magistrate? That's the question. What you can do right now is track down Macready and put them in his hands, together with this tape. I'm going to get a cab. There's one more lead I want to try before I call it quits for the day. It's an off chance, but you never know." As the taxi drew up outside the King's Arms, Bryony could already hear and feel the pulsing of music. When she opened the door, the noise was almost deafening. The pub was packed out, with the lounge bar transformed into a blue-lit cavern, thick with cigarette smoke. It didn't look like Gareth's scene at all, and in any case it would be near impossible to find him in this melee. Some women were gyrating to the beat, watched by a bunch of men clutching pint glasses, who mercifully didn't pay her much attention as she slid past. She pushed on through to the back bar, which was lit normally, but the noise level was the same. No sign of Gareth. Realizing she was parched, she bought a half of lemonade, which she downed at a rate Hannah might have been challenged to match, then made up her mind to go home. It wasn't an easy decision to make. Angela Gleason's voice echoed in her head. "Do you have even the slightest idea what this is like for us?" Yes, she did. It was a journey that curved away from hope, hour by hour. The first night was purgatory, but the second and third nights were sheer hell. Again, one of Macready's maxims rang in her head. An hour with an alert brain is worth 12 hours floundering around following leads just for the sake of it. Go home and try to sleep, she told herself. Think of it as a professional task. The band switched to a new number, at smooch tempo, which made her all the more self-conscious on the trip back through the lounge bar. But really she was too done in to register much embarrassment as she excused her way around the interlaced couples, until she noticed that one half of one of the couples was Gareth. His face was pushed into the neck of a long-haired girl, but there was no mistaking the back of the well-worn leather jacket. A wave of new feelings surged through Bryony. It was beyond her to identify the feeling exactly, but disappointment seemed to be somewhere in the mix. It was the kind of feeling that prompted most women to back off. But there was a sense of urgency dictating another kind of action. At least she allowed herself to wait for the interminable song to finish and for him to raise his head. "Gareth," she said, touching him on the sleeve. For an awful moment he reacted blankly, as if he wasn't going to recognize her. But he managed to raise a weak smile. "Hello, Bryony. This is—" He frowned. "Trisha!" the girl hissed, pulling away from him. "Hi!" Bryony exclaimed, stupidly. "Look, Gareth, I'm really sorry about this, but I need to talk to you rather urgently. Would you mind? Could we go outside for a minute, do you think?" "Excuse me, will you?" said Trisha, and dived off through the crowd. "Sorry," Bryony mumbled again. "Sorry, I didn't mean to." Evidently Gareth was not used to being caught between two women. Wearing the blank look again, he made his way out and stood on the pavement, hands in his pockets, waiting for her to catch up. "Crop circles," she blurted out. "I have to talk to you about crop circles." He looked at her in genuine puzzlement.
"It's urgent, is it?"
They set off walking down Parks Road, and Bryony stepped up the pace, trying to galvanize her common sense back into action before pursuing the topic. "You said you talked to some people who were involved in making them. I'm approaching you as a potential witness now, and I need to know who those people are." He sucked a breath in through closed lips. "Why?" Look, suddenly and unaccountably, she found herself on the verge of tears. Among all the things her experience had prepared her for, going to pieces like this was not one of them. She walked still faster and tried for a breezy tone. "The case I'm working on has got very serious. 2 little boys have gone missing." Sob. She had to admit it was a sob that came out, reinforced by a tear that decided to emerge from her nose rather than the usual place. He stopped in his tracks, but she carried on 6 paces before grinding to a halt herself to fish in her bag for a tissue. "Shouldn't we find somewhere to sit down or something?" he said. "There's a bench along here in front of the park. Will that do?" She steered a course to the bench, trying to force her mouth back into a respectable shape as he sat beside her. "Sorry," she sniffed. "Don't keep saying you're sorry." "Sorry." They sat for a moment in silence, Gareth leaning forward, elbows on his knees, and Bryony straight-backed, staring along the street through a thick veil of tears. "So who is it exactly who's gone missing?" he asked, framing the words slowly. 8-year-old boys. Twins. And you've reason to believe they've gone off to make crop circles? He allowed himself to look at her with a touch of quizzical humour. "It's possible they've been abducted by someone who's connected with this crop circles thing. And no, we're not talking about aliens." "Oh, I see. Are you allowed to tell me who we are talking about?" "The names I've got so far are Finch, surname only, James Edwards, Leonard Croydon, Adrian Gill." He nodded, still speaking and reacting slowly. "Len Croydon. Yes, he was mentioned. Been doing a PhD in maths. Geometry's his field. He draws up some of the designs. And James Edwards." "Who?" Bryony spat the words out like an accusation, and he turned and stared at her. "It was you said the name in the first place, Bryony." Sorry. I'm afraid I'm a bit churned up about this, more than I realized." Her voice wobbled again, and a heavy tear dropped on her hand. "Oh dear," she said, "this is awful." "I won't tell on you. Are we doing an official police interview, or am I allowed to put my arm around you?" "I don't know." "If you're worried about that girl in the pub, I've only just met her. Don't suppose I'll meet her again, thanks to you." She managed a weak smile in response to his ironic grin. "That's better." His arm tightened around her shoulders. "I've been thinking about you, as a matter of fact. It was reported in the papers. There's been a double murder at the Pitt Rivers Museum. Police haven't released any details, they said. But the rumour mill's been going, and it sounded very nasty. I was wondering if you might be dealing with that." "That, and a whole lot more. But right now, I have to find out anything that might help us lead to those boys." "Tell you what, why don't I walk you home, and we can talk on the way. See if we can work out what's useful information." Walking helped. They were halfway down the high street before either of them tried to renew the dialogue, and then it was the lure of the hot dog stand that triggered it. "I'm afraid I can't resist hot fried onions at this time of night," Gareth said. "Why don't you let me treat you?" The hot dog was good. Bryony could probably have eaten 6 of them, but one was enough to restore her self-control. She screwed up the wrapping and tossed it in the bin. "I need to know everything you can tell me about James Edwards." Then a thought came zapping into her head from nowhere. James Edwards. Does he ever use the nickname Jed? Still eating, Gareth shook his head slowly and looked puzzled, but Bryony was all fired up. She dived into her bag and took out the photo of Claire and Jed. "Do you recognise any of them?" "Give us a chance to get under the street lamp, will you?" He devoured the last of the hot dog, broke into a sprint, and stopped under a lamp on Magdalen Bridge.
That's him, the middle one. He was there.
Where? They started walking again at a steadier pace.
I went to a meeting at Linacre. It was a public debate about science and superstition, and I've always been kind of interested in that. I mean, that's why I asked you about that newspaper cutting in the first place, remember? This debate, there were 2 teams, with 3 people on each. One was what you might call the skeptics team. They were arguing that there's nothing that can't be explained by scientific principles. The other team was a bit of a mixed bunch, 2 women and 1 man. The bloke was one of those key-to-all mythologies enthusiasts, bit of an airhead. One of the women was a poet, and the other one I can't really remember. Some kind of earnest intellectual whose arguments no one could be bothered to follow. Halfway through, the poet tells this story about how she was walking in the country around Fox Hill. She went up the hill, and over on the other side she saw an incredible sight. A crop circle. She said it sent a shiver right through her. It was far too beautiful to be the work of human hands. Well, that did it, because this man Edwards just got up and said, "Thank you very much, ma'am, for the compliment, because actually that was my own work, with a little help from my friends. Brought the house down. We were in stitches." He insisted we sober up, though, to hear the rest of his case, which was an account of exactly how they make the circles. Edwards is a field crop biologist. He mentioned Leonard Croydon as someone working on a theory about the geometry of natural forms. Said they started doing the crop circles a few years ago as a hobby, but it had become quite a serious process of experiment.
And that's it?
That's about it.
James Edwards is a man of contradictions, or playing a double game, or like. When was this debate?
Monday night.
What? Monday of this week?
Yeah. We saw each other on Tuesday morning, remember? And I said I'd solved the crop circles mystery.
That's right. It's just that I've got to do a bit of mental rearrangement. Possible case of resurrection. If so, I need to talk to this guy Edwards.
Urgently?
Yeah, urgently. I'm sorry I screwed up your evening.
Did you? I hadn't noticed.
I don't seem to be much good at normal life. This morning I found myself wishing I had one, but this morning feels like 3 days ago.
So if you had a normal life, what would you do with it?
All the usual things. Read books, see films, pass around the gossip in the pub.
You wouldn't like it, believe me. I do that all the time and it's driving me nuts.
What do you want to do then?
I dunno. Find things out. I do a bit of journalism, special interest pieces for the Sunday papers. But business is slack right now. I need a zappy new topic.
What if I've got one for you? Have you heard of Giordano Bruno?
Sort of. Can't say I know anything about him.
He's supposed to have invented a memory system. Just the kind of thing I reckon I need.
You and me and 50 million other people.
Exactly. So why not find out about it? This is my street. I'm just a couple of doors down. If you cross here, you should catch the next bus in 5 minutes. Thanks for walking me home. She looked at him and managed another smile. Are we still friends?
Hope so. You going to give me a phone number?
She scribbled it in her notebook and tore the page out. And are you going to give me yours? Chapter 29. Saturday, 27th September, 1974. A few hours' sleep really would have been the most valuable use of the time before daybreak, but the nagging voice in Bryony's head persisted in waking her every 15 or 20 minutes through the small hours, bombarding her brain with unresolved queries, mismatched leads, and neglected details. She'd set the alarm for 4:30, but was up and dressed before it went off, and when she called HQ to check on the state of play, she was told her timing was perfect. Macready had called a briefing for 5:30 at Canterbury Road in order to have everyone primed for action by first light. The car that came to collect her had Foster in the front passenger seat. So much for her hopes of a quiet ride down, with some time to get her thoughts organised.
"We're closing in on Adrian Gill,"
he said in response to her good morning.
They traced more footprints last night on the track leading up Tower Hill from the B4000. Nice little patch of ground there, apparently. Perfect for taking imprints. Not too wet, not too dry. So if Prince Pavan's done his job well, I should be able to get a formal ID on them this morning. Means Gill was almost certainly the one involved in the pantomime with the horse's head.
Yes, thought Bryony. That squared with Donnelly's account. What's the news on fingerprints? Pavan was going to check the kitchen cupboards at the Gleesons.
Oh, yes. The mystery of the ginger biscuits. Touch of the Agatha Christie, that, isn't it? 2 bloody prints. You missed them first time, eh, Bryony? Dark wood on those cupboard doors. No match yet from criminal records, but they're working on it.
What about Pitt Rivers? Have forensics come up with any prints there?
It's the victims left all the prints there, on the walls. Stone floors aren't the best surface for keeping footprints, and the sockos can't get any fingerprints off the rocks that were thrown.
Foster coughed deeply.
What have you been up to, then?
Getting a bit of background on Adrian Gill's drug habit. There's indications that someone's got a lot of control over him. Someone with money and resources.
Drug baron? Something like that? I see what you're getting at. Bit of a long shot, isn't it?
This case is full of long shots, sir, and we've been on the receiving end of some of them.
Oh, very good, Bryony. Very good. Bit early in the morning for sharpening your wits, but I'm glad to see you're on the ball.
When they arrived, she found Canning and Elsingham sitting together over some papers. Elsingham jumped from his chair as soon as Bryony came in.
House in Boars Hill, he said. We think we've identified it. It's off the road, you see, on a long private driveway, so there's no street address with the post office.
He'd clearly been up all night. There was the telltale stubble, the wrenched look around the collar, the reddened eyes, and the slightly frenetic energy of someone running on the reserve tank. "We'll go up there and take a look," she said, "soon as the briefing's over. I'm being accused of taking long shots, but the combination of 2 lost kids and a bloke who cultivates drug addicts in a rambling Victorian house in Boars Hill doesn't appeal to me much, especially when his disciples have been stoning people to death." Elsingham rubbed the back of his neck.
You think we're dealing with some kind of disciple?
Well, something like that. Could be. Macready arrived for the briefing on the dot of 5:30, leaving no time for consultation with her beforehand, and launched straight into a report on the latest developments. One of these, as she'd just heard, was the identification of another footprint near the place where the horse mask had been discovered. Then Macready held up a small white object between his finger and thumb. Miles Gleeson's Ventolin inhaler, found in the same area, near some tyre tracks by the road skirting Tower Hill. The tracks themselves weren't much to go on, common Dunlop chevrons and well worn, but the forensic connections between the 3 murder sites were falling into place. Criminal records were running traces on some fingerprints found on the cupboard doors at Alcuin Close. The hunt was to be stepped up for the vehicle used by the killer, with house-to-house inquiries to be renewed in Bevington Road and the surrounding area. Leonard Croydon, of course, had now entered the spotlight, and patrols throughout the country were on the alert for sightings of his car. The friends in Wheatley who provided him with an alibi for the night of Sylvie Beck's murder confirmed that he had telephoned them on Sunday evening to say he had to leave Oxford for a day or 2, and seemed in an anxious state. Maps and sketches of the area around the ridgeway between Avebury and Wantage had been found in his flat. Macready added some snide remarks about the designs for crop circles filed amongst the maps, then paused while an assistant pinned autopsy photographs to one of the blackboards. They were not easy to look at, and silence descended on the room. The 2 smaller bodies found in Wayland's Wood had now been identified: Jessica Parks and Amanda Mason. The male body had an appendectomy scar from an operation performed less than 3 years ago. Croydon's medical records were being checked for corresponding information, but Jed was the more likely victim, and they still didn't have his full name.
All 3 have been killed in a similar way, said Macready. In the case of the male body, the injuries are fresher and easier to analyse. They were inflicted at close quarters, with heavy blows from several angles. The victims appear to have been restrained or held down, while their assailant went about his work. continuing until the cranium was thoroughly destroyed, and in the case of one of the girls, until he had actually severed the spinal cord, detached the head completely. It was found 2 feet away from the body. The murders are related, but it must be stressed, not identical. Sylvie Beck was killed with a single blow from behind, with a stone much larger than any of those used in the other cases. It has not been found. Dr. Nash and Mr. Crouch were felled by stones used as missiles, and although the head was the evident target, both sustained injuries to other parts of the upper body. They were confined, but in contrast to the victims found in Wayland's, not restrained. The force and fury was extreme. We are now dealing with 6 related murders, and all of us are deeply affected by fears for the 2 missing children. A few words of caution may be in order. Murder and mayhem are companions of old. If you wish to defeat them, you must maintain the principle of order in your own mind. System and reason are the bedrock of our profession. Murder incites us all to passion, but passion does not catch criminals. I've seen large squadrons of police descend into chaos in pursuit of their quarry, rushing around the city in their cars, generating vast boxes of index cards and interviewing hundreds of entirely irrelevant persons, while the killer continues to go about his business more or less free of inconvenience. The first murder victim had a stone clasped in her hand, upon which is carved a message: the busy fiend control. Mischief is always busy, and cannot be controlled through mere activity. A cool and steady mind is your first weapon as a police officer. Please remember that, especially as we appear to be dealing with a form of mischief that is bound up with superstition and fable-mongering of the worst kind. This would appear to be drawn from a number of sources. There are macabre legends surrounding the Wayland Smith long barrow, with its witching woods and devil's eye stones. Wayland the Smith is envisaged as a powerful demigod bent on revenge and with the propensity to use the tools of his forge on human heads. Most of this is bunkum. Wayland the Smith is a latter-day invention. One of my countrymen, the great Sir Walter Scott, wrote a novel in which Wayland features as an Elizabethan rogue, profiting from the manufacture of local superstitions. These folkloric elements have been drawn upon and exploited in the crimes we are investigating. At present, we must maintain an entirely open mind about who may be behind this concoction of ugly fictions. But we've been presented with one narrative that offers us a particular suspect, a mastermind, with a history of involving young persons in what we might call imaginative experiments. Mr. Kevin Donnelly, who acted as counsellor to Sylvia Len Beck, turns out to be a mine of fascinating information, but in the opinion of DCI Latham, his account offers us little that is of any formal value as evidence. Donnelly has a record of drug abuse and seems to veer between a tendency to extreme evasiveness with the police and a wish to unburden himself of everything he can think of. During this last section of the talk, Bryony felt that steam was about to come out of her ears. It was a covert reprimand to her for being gullible and devoting vital time to a red herring. Her hand shot up. "Excuse me, sir. There's an aspect of Donnelly's story on which I have some new information. The involvement of James Edwards." "As far as I'm concerned, Williams, there are no reliable grounds for considering that James Edwards has anything to do with this case." "Oh, yes, there is. I've found another witness who has identified James Edwards as Jed, the second man in the photograph of the original expedition group, and he was alive and well on Monday night at a student gathering in Oxford." "It's light now," whispered Miles. He had been lying on his side, with his shoulder pressed against the hard floor and his eyes open for what felt like ages. The benches had funny little cushions on them, so he had a sort of a pillow, but with his face so close to the dusty wooden floorboards he was wheezing badly, and he had to concentrate very hard to stop himself from coughing. The devil was not supposed to come into the church, but if he knew they were in there, he might just dive in quickly to get them. Daniel sat up, his back hunched over his bent knees,
and rubbed his face with his arm. They were lying between the pews, so he was very cautious about showing his head above the seats. The visitor might be there after all, just watching and waiting. He remembered what Smith had said. It can get in. It can get in wherever it fucking wants. It's the fucking visitor. You weren't supposed to swear in church, but he was only thinking the swear words. But even if you were only thinking them, the church might stop protecting you. There was a shaft of light coming through the window high above the altar. It was shining right down the middle of the church. It was a very small church, with a few rows of seats on either side. Daniel put his elbows on the polished wooden pew and knelt up, with his back to the altar. The door of the church was closed. They'd found it open, but when they got inside they closed it and pushed the big iron bolt across. The visitor couldn't get through that, could he? Perhaps the visitor didn't need a door to come through. There was a tall black shadow in the corner that almost made Daniel scream out, but it was only a vase with big flowers in it. Miles sat up as well, but the movement made him cough. "Shh!" hissed Daniel. Then they heard the sound of a door opening, not at the front of the church where they had come in, but at the back, behind the altar, where there were some heavy curtains. They dived down again and lay on their stomachs, Miles straining to get control of the wheezing. He counted to 10, trying to let the breath out a bit at a time. 1, 2, 3. There were footsteps. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They came down the aisle of the church and stopped. Chapter 30. As they drove through Cumnor, the first rays of sun broke through to the east, and on the climb to Boars Hill there was a stunning view over the city. Canning, who was at the steering wheel, wound his window right down and breathed deeply.
"Clears your head," he remarked. "You know, people used to say you could see all the way across to the Bristol Channel from here. That was before a lot of the higher buildings went up, of course. One of your predecessors in the CID, old bloke who retired a couple of years after I joined the force, he lived in the village at Wootton, and he said whenever a case got the better of him, he'd take a walk up Boars Hill, spend 20 minutes standing on John Mound to look at the view. When he was walking back, he'd have a new perspective."
"Don't talk to me about perspective," Elsingham groaned. "My head's spinning with bloody perspective." He was hunched in the back seat. "It's lovely fresh air, I agree," he added, "but a bit bracing for me, to tell you the truth." Canning wound the window halfway up again.
"That's because you've been up all night. Low body heat. Sure sign that your brain won't be working properly, Elsingham. What you should do is get out and stand on that mound for a while."
He might as well have done so, because it took them 20 minutes to find the house. "You sure you've got the location right?" asked Bryony. "I got it out of the horse's mouth, didn't I? I wrote down exactly what they told me at the post office. Follow the road out of Wootton till you get to John Way. John Way takes a left-hand bend in the middle, and just where that bend is, there's 2 laneways leading off to your right. You take the right-hand laneway and go all the way to the end, where there's 3 newer houses. Follow the laneway round on the left, and the driveway to the Lima runs off through the trees a bit further along to your right. You go up the driveway and you see a row of elm trees. There's a path between them to the house. Front of it faces east."
"Jolly good,"
said Canning.
"You sure you're not talking in your sleep back there?"
Elsingham tapped his notepad. "Like I said, I've got it written down, word for word." Eventually they found the laneway that corresponded with Elsingham's description. It led up to 3 identical red brick houses, and as they drove around behind these, a rambling old mansion came into view.
"Well, it looks the part, doesn't it?"
said Elsingham. There was ivy creeping up to the roofline, and a mock Gothic archway over the entrance bore the name Thelema. Towering elm trees blocked out the sun, so that most of the house was in deep shadow, and a border of overgrown rhododendrons stretched along the side wall. After a couple of rounds of clatter with the metal door knocker, there was still no sound from inside. They divided up for the search, and Bryony worked her way clockwise round the building. To the right of the front door was a small mottled window that probably belonged to a downstairs cloakroom. Behind that was a set of higher windows that she could only just see into, but she gained a quick impression of large pieces of furniture at odd angles, stored rather than arranged for living. The rhododendrons began at the next corner and stretched right down that side of the house. There was just no point in trying to tunnel into them, but she did her best to explore by pushing into them here and there where the branches would allow, shining her torch through. If anyone had been hiding in here, there would have been signs of broken branches at least. As for bodies, they would be hard to find without a thorough search. At the back of the house were more bushes, but not quite as impenetrable, and she managed to get a good look through two of the windows. One gave a view down a hallway with a back staircase, probably the servants' quarters in the original plan. The other window revealed a room stacked high with boxes and crates. So far, she had seen no indication of anyone actually living there. But as she walked back towards the front, along the north-facing side wall, she saw an upper window that was open, with something that looked like a strip of rag dangling from it. She stepped back to get a better angle and called out, "Hello? Anyone there?" There was no answer, but Canning emerged from a shed nearby to see what was happening. He looked up at the window, then at the ground.
"Gravel round here is a bit disturbed,"
he remarked, pointing to where it was pitted, with evidence of spray over the grass nearby.
"There's more of that sort of thing around near the shed. It's a gravel driveway, and looks as if there's been a bit of coming and going, but no tyre marks, unfortunately."
He went back to the shed while she finished her tour of the house. Finding a window at the front that looked into a sitting room where the chairs were actually placed as if they could be sat in. There was a television set with a mug and a plate on top of it. Newspapers were strewn around the floor, but not close enough for her to judge how recent they were. She trudged back to the car, where Elsingham and Canning were already waiting. Elsingham opened his palms upwards as she approached, to indicate they'd found nothing. "Damn, damn, damn," she muttered, scowling at Canning, who was in the driver's seat with the door open and one leg on the ground in what suddenly struck her as an infuriatingly casual attitude. "So you didn't see anything? Anything at all worth reporting on?"
"Lots of hiding places, no one hiding. Sheds, outside lavatory, garage with no vehicles in it."
Elsingham was looking around as if he still hoped to catch sight of something or someone.
"What about the house?" he asked.
"Signs of habitation in one of the rooms. The others just look as if they're being used for storage. One window open on the top floor. Thing is, this place is only about 15-16 miles to the White Horse Hill, cross-country. You could do it on a clear run in less than 20 minutes. There has to be some connection. There has to be." She dropped into the front passenger seat, and Canning started the engine, while Elsingham was still leaning against the bonnet.
"Wakey, wakey," he called.
They were turning back into the main road when there was a cry from the back seat.
"What's that in your hair, Inspector?"
"What?" Bryony's hand went up instinctively and met some spikily unfamiliar shape that moved as she touched it.
"Yikes!" exclaimed Elsingham. "It's on me now."
"Wind up the windows!" yelled Bryony. "Quick!"
"I thought it was a twig in your hair, then it moved. It's a stick insect."
"I know it's a bloody stick insect. Catch it. Get it in your handkerchief or something." Canning was chuckling.
"Don't hurt it, will you? Most of them are perfectly harmless. I used to keep them when I was a boy. They're rather partial to rhododendron leaves."
Bryony called Bevan and got him to come and collect the trophy immediately.
"Oh," he beamed, "it's only a baby."
Bryony was on tenterhooks. "Then where are the parents? Is it one of them? You know, the ones we saw upstairs in Alcuin Close?"
"A Lord Howe Island. Quite possibly, judging from the body shape. It's large, even for a full-grown version of any of the common English species."
"How common are those big things? I mean,
What are the chances of it being a coincidence if the one from Boar's Hill is the same species?
Nil, I'd say. It's actually supposed to be extinct, though of course it's hard to know for certain whether an insect species has completely disappeared. My biologist friends have greeted our find with great excitement.
So maybe the intruder at the Gleasons got excited as well, enough to take it home and adopt it.
You're jumping to conclusions again, Bryony.
Not conclusions, possibilities. I need to know if they're the same species. I want an answer in half an hour, definitive. She looked at her watch. Still only 7:45. Well, Gleason claimed to be an early riser, and it was doubtful he'd had any sleep at all under the circumstances. She could fill in the time usefully by having another go at him. There had to be more to learn about Leonard Croydon. When he opened the door to her, Gleason seemed much chastened, and even tried to be polite, showing her into the pink sitting room. She'd come primed for a showdown, so this was a bit disarming, but she couldn't afford to go soft on him. "There are some questions I still need answers to," she said, "and I'm cutting out a few formalities coming here on my own. My first question is, do you want to cooperate with the team who are trying to find your children, or do you want to go on playing games?" He looked at her with watery blue eyes.
"This is no game."
"I'm glad you realise that. Now, we know that Miles and Daniel went to visit Leonard Croydon in Bevington Road yesterday afternoon. We need to know more about this man." Gleason was shifting in his seat. OK, he'd had no sleep for the past 24 hours, but something else was making him uncomfortable. Bryony took a punt. "You don't like Leonard Croydon, do you, Dr. Gleason?" "Why not?"
"To be perfectly honest, because I thought he'd been having it off with my wife."
She said nothing. As Macready had taught her, sometimes it was best to let silence do the work. When Gleason spoke again, the words came tumbling out.
"Last Friday night, I came in the front door and up the stairs, and I thought I saw someone going off down the stairs at the other end of the landing. I was pissed enough to have imagined it, but I'd had my suspicions before. I went straight into the bedroom and accused Angela. Not too delicately, I may say, and I think I may have taken a sort of swipe at her. Anyway, she got completely hysterical and started bashing me with a pillow. I thought she was going to wake the boys up, so I went and locked myself in the study and spent the rest of the night there, on the floor."
"But you didn't see fit to tell any of this to the police, even though it's highly relevant to a murder inquiry?"
He stared at the ground. "Well, it's useless bloody information, isn't it? Obviously Leonard wouldn't have killed that girl. I might have caught a glimpse of the sod who did it, but not enough to be any help identifying him. So I'd made a scene with my wife and failed to stop a murderer leaving my house red-handed. It was all very embarrassing. What was the good of telling you that? Better to say I was home before it all happened, sleeping the sleep of the dead drunk."
Progress at last. She could see some of the tension going out of him. "How did you come to employ Croydon?"
"A recommendation."
Gleason looked at the floor. "From?"
"From someone I met in hall at lunchtime. We got into a philosophical argument, then into a more general chat. For some reason he knew I had twins, and he was asking about their education. I told him it wasn't a happy story. 2nd Division Latin and 3rd Division Maths, which would put them out of the competition for scholarships when they got into the 3rd form. Then he started talking about a postgraduate student, a brilliant mathematician who offered tutoring. He said he'd put him in touch with us."
"When was this?" Bryony asked.
"June. Early June."
"Who was this man?"
"I didn't register his name."
"Describe him."
"Early 60s, thick-set, big head, with lots of grey hair. Afraid I can't be any more exact. We have a lot of visitors passing through the college. I meet people all the time, and I don't remember much about them. I only really noticed him because of the way he was arguing."
"What was he arguing about?"
"The Pelagian heresy. Free will and predestination. That old chestnut. Defunct argument, really, since no one seriously believes in divine providence anymore. But he was being provocative. He was pushing the idea of absolute free will. That's much more problematic."
"Have you ever heard the expression, 'Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law'?"
"Oh, that's Aleister Crowley, who took it from Rabelais." a fantasy of a frustrated monk.
It's rather a dangerous fantasy, isn't it?
For sure. In someone with a certain kind of mind, it could be dangerous. Don't suppose it's a maxim the police force are likely to adopt.
A certain kind of mind, you said.
Do you really want a philosophical discussion, Inspector?
I want your explanation. And I'll take notes. He pushed back imaginary sleeves from his wrists and sat forward, his elbows on his knees.
Extreme doctrines of the will are always dangerous, whether they're pushing total predestination or the opposite. People have been tortured and burnt to death over that sort of fanaticism. In the end, it's about power, imposing your own model of the world on everyone else.
Even if it's free will you're pushing?
Extremists of one camp or the other end up being identical, because they think they're the channel for destiny. They've bought into a delusion, and they're not keen on people with a mind of their own who might threaten it, likely to shoot them or worse. Go through a list of a dozen of the worst despots and dictators you can think of, and I'll guarantee you'll find every one of them is driven by an obsession with destiny and the will. Haven't you ever seen that vile film made about Hitler in the 1930s, Triumph of the Will? A title like that should set off all the warning lights.
And that's what you teach your students?
Among other things.
Sounds like good teaching to me. She paused to read back through the notes, then turned a page. I've got one more thing to ask you about. Do you remember taking Miles and Daniel to see the White Horse at Uffington?
Yes, I took them there one Sunday. Forget exactly when. It was in spring.
The 1st of May. Tell me what you remember about that day.
I was writing a lecture on Aquinas. I went and worked in the pub while Sylvie took the boys up to see the horse.
Is that all you remember? Gleeson looked away from her.
No. Miles and Daniel arrived back on their own just as I was starting to wonder where they'd got to, and Sylvie turned up half an hour later. She was in a state, convinced something or someone was chasing her. Made quite a scene in the pub, I can tell you. Everyone in there rushed out to see what they could see, but none of them could see anything. Then she started raging at the boys, accusing them of trying to lead her into the woods, or something totally paranoid. It was her first, what you might call, episode.
You jumped to that conclusion pretty quickly?
Correction. It's a conclusion I came to over the next 3 weeks, on the basis of her progressive obsession that someone was watching her, following her, and about to manifest himself in her bedroom. When a person's trying to lock an intruder out, you might credit them with a halfway rational fear. If they start raving on about being locked in with someone, or something that isn't even there, I think it's a pretty safe bet to say they're not in their right mind.
Gleeson suddenly seemed to be going to pieces.
Look, I can't talk any more now. Don't you realise I'm going demented about what might have happened to my sons?
What's happened to them, Dr. Gleeson, is almost certainly connected to what's happened to Sylvie Beck. Did it never occur to you that she was scared out of her wits because someone actually was pursuing her?
But why?
It's been the hardest question in this case. My guess is that she witnessed something on the day she got lost.
Certainly that never occurred to me. But if someone was trying to shut her up, they seem to have gone about it in a pretty complicated way.
I don't think they wanted to shut her up. I think they wanted to involve her. There was a knock on the door of the room, and a uniformed sergeant came in.
Urgent message for you, Inspector.
She whisked out, shutting the door behind her. What is it?
Message from DCI Latham, Inspector. He wants you to go to the Radcliffe. He says Claire Belmont's condition has changed.
Chapter 31. Claire certainly looked different. She was sitting up in bed in a white Victorian nightdress with her eyes made up and her hair combed out over her shoulders. Hannah, perched on the edge of the mattress, was now the one who looked a bit the worse for wear. There were dark hollows around her eyes, and her hair had gone dank and limp.
"We're all back to the happy and friendlies,"
she commented as Bryony came in. Claire blushed. It was hard to fake a blush. "Look," she said, "I'm sorry if To be honest, I don't know what I might have said to you. I've been out of it, you know, completely out of it." Hannah lifted one knee and clasped it between her hands.
Can't say I do know, Claire. Don't think I've ever been quite that out of it." Steve seemed to be enjoying the byplay. Claire greeted them with a very normal-looking smile and extended her hand.
"Thank you for finding me," she said. "I gather it was a bit of a heroic effort."
Bryony smiled back, relieved at the new ease in communication.
"It's good to see you looking so much better. I'm afraid we have to take advantage of it to go through some questions, though. How's your memory?" "They gave me a test just now. I know who the Prime Minister is. I know my full name and address, what size shoes I take, how much money is in my bank account, my father's date of birth, and my mother's maiden name. But I don't know what's happened since last Friday."
Steve shifted in his seat, foraging in his jacket pocket, and handed Claire the now rather dog-eared print of Hannah's photograph. "You remember having this taken?"
"That was in the afternoon. And we need to know what happened afterwards," said Bryony. "I went home at 4, had a bath, packed my things, made some phone calls. Jed came a bit early." "Jed who?" said Bryony. "Edwards. Jed's short for James Edwards."
"All right, carry on."
"He arrived early, so I made us some coffee and we just sat and chatted for a while, because it was no use being early to collect Sylvie. We set off exactly on time, at 7:45, but when we got to St. Giles, she wasn't there. After about 20 minutes, we drove up the Woodstock Road, in case she was walking down to meet us. No sign of her. I mean, it was on the cards that she'd change her mind, or that the family she works for would put a spoke in the wheel, so what could we do? Jed thought we should go anyway, and I was in the mood to get out of Oxford. It was a really mild evening, almost like midsummer. We had the roof of the car open. It's called a moon roof, appropriately enough, because there was the most amazing moon, a perfect silver crescent. The roads were clear, and it's a powerful car, so the drive didn't take long, and on the climb up the White Horse Hill we had the most spectacular view over the Vale. I was starting to think, slightly guiltily perhaps, that we'd had a lucky escape. I was enjoying Jed's company, and Sylvie had begun to feel like a burden. But I was also starting to wonder what would happen about sleeping arrangements. Of course, the original plan was for me and Sylvie to sleep in Adrian's van, and the 2 guys to have the tent. But it now looked as if Adrian wasn't going to make an appearance either. We put the tent up and went for a walk around the rim of the hill fort, talking. You know those rare conversations, when the other person, just from the way they're listening, seems to prompt you to bring out thoughts you never knew you had.
"Yeah," said Hannah. "It's called an ego trip."
Claire shrugged. "What's an ego anyway?"
Bryony was anxious to move things along. The Some Enchanted Evening story wasn't ringing true to her ears.
"So, did Adrian turn up at all?"
Claire's eyes widened.
"Yes, he did. You'll have to let me get to that bit. It's not—"
"We understand," said Steve. "Take your time." She pushed back a curtain of shining hair, then bowed her head so it fell forward again.
"We'd walked all around the edge of the fort and were coming back to the tent when he said, 'We're not going to sleep in there, are we?' I laughed. 'What's with the we?' He was standing facing me. 'Why sleep in that tight little space on a night like this when you should sleep naked on the ground?' Then he suddenly made a grab for me, a really crude grab, the kind you'd normally reward with a hard slap. I pulled back and looked at him in disbelief, but there seemed to be no expression on his face at all. I told him I didn't want to sleep up there, and he had to take me to a campsite or a hotel. By way of reply, he took his sleeping bag out and laid it on the ground a few yards away. I got in the tent, zipped the entrance flap down, and went to sleep, fully clothed." She pushed her hair back again, but this time grasped a handful of it and began twisting it around. "Some time later, I woke up. I could see through the canvas there was a little spot of light moving round, and I heard footsteps. Then I heard voices. So I very quietly opened the tent flap to take a look. Jed was standing up, talking to a tall, skinny bloke, or rather the tall bloke was muttering and whispering, and Jed was listening. I thought it was probably Adrian, but I also thought, this is not a good situation. Maybe there was absolutely no need to be afraid, but now I didn't trust Jed, or the other one.
So I just sat in the tent and listened. I got everything ready, my shoes on, backpack strapped up, torch in my hand, and I thought, I'll time it. After it's been quiet for an hour, I'll see if they've gone to sleep, and if they have, I'll just walk out on my own. There must be a village nearby. It was 4:15, and I managed to stick it out until just before 5. Then I decided to make a break for it. As I crawled out, I could see where Jed was lying, but I couldn't see Adrian. He was behind me, standing right by the tent. I mean, literally right beside it. And when he saw me, he just laughed and made this sudden movement. I didn't really see what happened, but he'd pulled the tent canvas right out of the ground and started whirling it round his head. I tried to dive out of the way, but I wasn't quick enough, and it caught me here. She touched the left side of her head. I fell. That's all I remember.
You lost consciousness, said Steve.
I suppose so.
But not over 4 days. You must have come to during that time. Hannah leant towards her. When I was with you yesterday, you told me some story about Perseus and Andromeda. You made quite a little speech, all tizzied up with quotes from Macbeth. You said you'd heard voices.
You told us the same story, said Bryony. Did I? Claire's eyes were wide and searching. It was a different face from the one they'd seen before.
What I want to know is, said Hannah, what you were doing when we saw you in Wayland's Wood.
Claire shook her head. I don't remember. You really didn't hear us calling you by name? There seemed to be people calling my name all the time. I don't know where I was, but there were voices all around me. That's about all I could tell you.
Then we've got to do something to help you remember. Hannah slid off the bed. What we have to do is take you there. Then it'll come back to you. Macready will never agree to it. Steve was leaning against the wall outside the hospital, drawing smoke deep into his lungs. He'll never agree to it because...
Because what?
Bryony snapped. Which of 19 reasons would you prefer? He started counting on his fingers. 1. It's putting her at risk. It's hard to shield someone from a berserker who likes chucking great rocks around.
Why is she more at risk there than here?
2. It's not a reliable way to get evidence and information. It might produce false leads. 3. It's not even a priority lead to follow. With 2 missing children, we're in an emergency. We have to pick inquiry lines more directly related to their whereabouts, and there are plenty of those. 4. James Edwards is likely to be picked up at any time. As soon as he is, you and I need to be there for the grilling.
Okay, that's enough. Let me think for a minute. Supposing Donnelly's account of things is pretty much accurate.
Steve snorted smoke and coughed. Then I'm up for a trip to La La Land to learn the miracle memory system. Donnelly's brain is a cocktail of drugs and fantasies. Have you seen those notes he writes on his patients?
But that's not how he talks. The statements we've got from him are quite coherent. A lot more coherent than certain theories I've heard recently about prosopagnosia. He laughed and gave her a lopsided smile. It was exquisitely coherent. Everything fitted. The behaviour, the circumstances, the physical condition, the tosh in her diary about not being able to see faces. All right, granted. Shame it just happened to be wrong.
So you see, just because everything fits, it doesn't mean you've got the right explanation. That's why you've got to be careful of getting sucked into this story of Donnelly's. I'll tell you something. He pointed at Bryony with a nicotine-stained finger. I've been listening to that tape you made, and there's actually something that doesn't fit. At all. He waved the finger from side to side. Why would Finch kidnap those boys?
He wants them for something. Some kind of experiment. I've been wondering. Maybe he's got a thing about twins. One of the Wiltshire cops told me that the 2 Bishopston girls were often mistaken for twins. Some people think twins are psychic.
You're missing the point, Bryony. The point is, whoever has taken those boys has got himself up shit creek without a paddle. Kidnap's a crime that nearly always backfires. Gets the perpetrator in a double bind. Can't send the victims back because they know too much. Can't keep them because it's too much trouble. So the only option really is to do them in.
I don't like that line of reasoning.
Neither do I. But look, what I'm trying to say is this. The kidnapping of Miles and Daniel wasn't planned. The boys were skiving school on their own initiative. They got off the bus at the wrong stop, went to buy sweets, then went visiting. That produced an opportunity, and someone took it without thinking through the consequences. A mistake like that doesn't at all fit the profile Donnelly gives of Finch.
OK. Bryony was thinking fast. But suppose Finch operates on the Godfather principle. Everything's done at one remove, even the drug dealing.
Which is the only part of Donnelly's story I'd credit, Steve interrupted.
Shut up and let me get this out. Supposing it's Adrian Gill who's been doing the killing. From what we know of him, he's a psycho. He's off his face. But there's a lot of planning and control in the crimes we've seen. Last Tuesday, before the attack on Nash, the perp made warning visits to me and to Donnelly. His timing was as exact as his targeting. And he stalked Sylvie for weeks. He got in that little upstairs room next to her and just lurked, like he did outside Claire's tent. But with Sylvie he did it night after night. Think about it. After she's gone to sleep, he walks into her bedroom and just stands there in the dark, maybe for hours. A visitor. She thinks it's a ghost or a vision or a manifestation or whatever. Think of the control involved in that. He was breaking her down psychologically. And when he killed her, it was one king hit. Pavan will tell you how rare that is.
So what are you saying?
I dunno. Has Gill been trained in some way?
You're determined on this Finch connection, aren't you? What have you really got to go on?
You'll find out.
Chapter 32. Macready was sitting at the desk Bryony had been using, talking on the phone. When he saw her through the glass partition, he put his hand over the mouthpiece and beckoned.
I hear you developed an exotic line in hair ornaments, Williams. Pavan is full of admiration. I have him on the phone here now. He's made an express trip to Boar's Hill, where he's found quite a little family of Lord Howe Island stick insects. They may need alternative accommodation when the winter sets in.
Then it's a definite link between that house and the Gleesons. Someone must have been coming and going between them. Isn't that grounds for a warrant?
I'm about to persuade the magistrate to that effect. I suggest you get back up there. I'll follow and have the warrant papers delivered to us on the premises.
This time there was a veritable convoy of cars heading up to Boar's Hill, and a dozen men had assembled for the search by the time Macready arrived. 5 officers under Canning's direction were to recommence the exterior search. The rest were to go through the house, room by room, as rapidly as possible in the first instance, to find out whether anyone else was in it. Macready ran up the main staircase, directing men to the left and the right as it branched at the first floor. Pavan followed them, but more slowly, taking in the surrounds as he went. Left with 4 officers to start on the ground floor, Bryony led them across the hallway and into the sitting room she had seen through the window, quickly checking the contents of the mug on the way through. The remains of the coffee, she judged, were not more than a few days old. The newspapers were dated variously, from 3 months ago to last week. Books, hundreds of them, lined the walls. A second door led out of the sitting room into a narrow passage, with stairs to the upper and lower floors.
"Basement first,"
she called, noticing a door at the bottom. It was locked. She stood aside while 2 of the men shouldered it open and tumbled through, caught by an extra step on the other side. They found themselves in a kitchen, large and antiquated. Rapid streaks of movement across the floor betrayed the presence of rodents, but she didn't have time to take in any more. "Search it," she called, as she sprinted back up the stairs and onto the first floor, where the other 2 men were systematically opening doors on either side of the hallway. "Junk rooms," one of them remarked. As she strode past, she registered piles of books, stacks of rolled carpet, cardboard boxes, and a distinctly musty smell. There was a call from above them, then what sounded like a stampede of feet moving through on the other side of the house. She increased her pace to a full run, rounding the next corner with carefully judged speed. The wide central staircase was ahead of her now, with a line of officers stopped along the next flight, all looking up. Macready came to the banister at the top as she reached the first step. "Miles and Daniel have been here," he announced. "We found their satchels. Now you can all get off the staircase, please, and continue your work. I want every room checked."
Bryony moved to the doorway through which he had disappeared. Her first impression was that this room, in contrast to the other parts of the house she'd seen so far, was set up for habitation. There was a single bed against the wall, with a tumbled mess of blankets on it, a brightly coloured rug on the floor, and chairs with cushions, and there was an open window. She went over to join Pavan, who was inspecting it, and saw a strip of torn sheet tied to the notched bar at the bottom. The nails attaching the bar to the frame had almost been pulled away. "So this is how they got out," she said, suddenly filled with hope. "They tied the sheets to this and climbed down. So where are they?" Macready had already sent an officer to call for reinforcements. His attention was now directed to the satchels which lay on the floor. Bryony watched him, half in fascination, half in frustration, as he began going through the schoolbooks page by page. There was always something awful about the moment when the thrill of the chase had to be exchanged for the slow, minute trawl of detective work. Well, she couldn't just stand there. She put her own gloves on and started leafing through Miles Gleason's geography book. The geography seemed to stop at a page on which, facing a messily sketched map of Africa, Miles had branched out into some exercises of his own. He'd begun with drawings of the dog, making a fair attempt at getting the shape of Toffee's ears and snout, but giving her the thick body and stumpy legs of an overweight cow. On the next page was a square house with a triangular roof, the kind of house that always seems to get into children's drawings, except that the figure of a man could be seen through one of the windows. Facing this was a drawing of the man coming through a door with a dripping knife in his hand. She turned the page again to a double spread showing prostrate figures with pools of blood around them, the trickles joining to form a rivulet down the spine of the book. The man with the knife, in much larger scale than the other figures, stood grinning over the bodies. She handed the book to Macready, who studied it for a couple of minutes, then exploded. Why hadn't the boys been interviewed on the first day of the Woodstock murder inquiry? If there was the slightest chance they had been witnesses, Bryony should have known they were at risk. "They were interviewed by Canning yesterday morning," she said, keeping her voice as steady as possible. "Neither of them said anything to him about having seen Sylvie's killer." This, of course, was just the moment Latham chose to make his appearance. He looked at the drawings, turned the pages back and forth, then picked up another of Miles's books. "Boy's a bit of a cartoonist," he said, holding out another sample page with action scenes that involved people shooting each other, jumping off cliffs, engaged in sword fights. He returned to the geography book. "I doubt these are anything more than imaginings, sir, though the image of the man standing at the window is a worry." Macready stepped over the mess of books on the floor. "I will leave you to ponder the meaning of that, Latham. What were the lads doing here, that's the question. Or what was being done with them?" "There's a room along there you should look at, sir," said Steve. They followed him further down the hallway to a small chamber in one corner of the house, with low windows in two of the walls and a polished round table set between them. A nice place to sit and read, or look at the view, except that the monstrous wooden statue in the middle of the floor would have been a bit distracting, with its elongated horse face and antlers branching from the forehead. This was nastier than any of the other versions Bryony had seen. It was waist-high and carved in lurid detail. The mouth was open, as if in some distorted bray, with lips twisted and a row of long teeth on show. They looked like real teeth, set into the dark wood, so the discoloured enamel showed yellow. And the heavy-lidded eyes, too, might have been real. Round white stones with carved pupils had been set into the sockets. The torso was that of a fit young man, broad shoulders and slimming towards the waist, a vast erect phallus shot like a spear from the groin. Macready's attention was elsewhere. The cabinet mentioned by Donnelly was in a corner behind the door, and on it stood a large polished wooden box. "A magic lantern," he said, turning it so that the two projection cylinders were visible. "There should be a screen somewhere. Ah, yes!" A roll of white sheeting was lying on the floor behind the cabinet. "That would account for Donnelly's visions of pandemonium. So this is where all the madness begins," he said. "I wouldn't call it madness," Latham remarked. "Somebody's well and truly in control of this game.
Come and have a look next door. It was a much larger room, set out as a laboratory. By the wall at the far end was a glass tank about 18 inches high and 4 feet long, set on a wooden frame so that it was raised to eye level. In it were freshly cut branches of rhododendron, on which a king-size stick insect was munching. A bench along the centre was equipped with Bunsen burners, attached to cylinders of fuel. Clearly these had been in recent use. In the centre of a bench was a sink surrounded by glass vessels. Shelves lining the walls were crowded with stoppered jars and bottles containing substances of various kinds, coloured liquids, charcoal, crystals. Latham picked up a cardboard packet from a shelf near the door. Household baking soda. I've heard of people mixing this up with cocaine, making a precipitate. You wait. Once the secret's out, it'll be all the rage. Macready barked at him. Cocaine is a rarity in this country, Latham. Let's hope it stays that way. A sense of excitement seemed to have spread through the house, with the rumour that the boys might have escaped. But the mood turned grim again as Pavan and his team reported bloodstains on the first-floor banisters and on the worn carpet of the hallway below. The railings under the banister were badly scuffed, and some plaster had been gouged out of the wall opposite. A fight, or at least a struggle, had taken place here. Within an hour, the house had become the domain of the Socco team. Macready stayed to direct the rest of the search, and Bryony was instructed to return to North Oxford with Elsingham to give the news to the Gleesons. They were about to set off when Latham sprinted up. "I'll ride back with you," he said, bouncing into the back seat so the whole car rocked. "Help you deal with the icebergs, if you like." "The what?" said Elsingham. "Gleeson and his missus. They're pretty uptight, aren't they?" "Understandably, in the circumstances." "Canning tells me that Gleeson got right up your nose. He's not your type, is he?" Bryony refrained from replying, but Elsingham couldn't resist the opportunity. "She thinks he's a prick, don't you, Inspector?" "Oh dear," Steve chuckled. "I don't think you should mention pricks. Not after what we've seen up there."
Chapter 33. As it turned out, both the Gleesons were at the North Oxford house, and there were indications they had actually been talking to each other. They took the news about the satchels in silence at first, as if they didn't know what to make of it. "So, have they got away?" Angela Gleeson asked eventually, her voice barely audible. "We've reason to hope so," said Bryony. "We'll keep you informed of anything we learn." Of course, this wasn't quite true. At this stage, the Gleesons were not to be told about the bloodstains, or about the sheets tied to the upper window. Bryony and Steve walked round to the incident room and rounded the corner into Canterbury Road to see a new green Porsche parked in the street. The officer stationed outside the front door reported that James Edwards had come to request an interview. "Request!" Bryony spat. "Request! I like that. I'll give him request." Edwards did not look good. He had an ugly cut over his right eye, extending into the hairline, where it disappeared into a clump of matted dark hair. Blood had seeped into his collar and down the front of his shirt. There was dried blood on his hands, blackening around the edges of his nails. His jeans were torn at the knee, and he sat with his left leg extended, foot at a strange angle. "I've come to request police protection," he said. "I don't care if you put me in a cell for the time being. I'll turn myself in." "For what exactly?" said Steve. He shrugged. "What's on the menu?" Steve slid back in his chair and made a steeple of his outstretched fingers. "Let's see. Kidnapping, murder, accessory to murder, dealing in illegal drugs, being accessory to same." "How about trespass? I've got the evidence. See?" He took out a battered envelope, from which spilt a dozen or so photographs of crop circles. "Some of these were done without permission. I can give you the farmers' names. They'll be happy to file complaints if they haven't already." Bryony, who'd been standing in the doorway watching this, took a seat behind the desk. "We don't work like that. Why don't you tell us what you've got to tell us, and we'll take it from there." He didn't meet her eye, but sat looking through the glass partition. "What I've got to tell you is there's a psycho on the loose, Adrian Gill.
He's got a history of drug abuse. He attacked me last night, and he's probably killed a friend of mine." "Good!" exclaimed Steve. "Very concise. Now let's have the longer version with all the gory details. First of all, how do you know this man, Gill?" Edward started to lay the photographs out on the desktop. "That means I'll have to explain about the crop circles." "Go ahead." "I'm a field crop biologist, doing research on crop growth patterns. A friend of mine, Leonard Croydon, is a mathematician studying natural geometry. That's controversial. It's based on a view that there are lines of magnetic orientation over the Earth, and that natural forms correspond with them. Perhaps that's enough explanation for you to see at least that our interests coincide. A few years ago, we started making crop circles, half for fun, half as a form of research experiment. You would be amazed how corn crops lend themselves to the etching of complex geometric patterns. We had a team of volunteers helping us, students mainly. Adrian offered his services early last year, but he behaved like a wild man, cutting and slashing in all directions. When the others protested, he said it was chaos magic. Basically, he was told where to get off, but it didn't end there. He took to following us around. He does that. He stalks people. Len complained recently that Adrian followed him home from work. And he followed you too. When? I don't make diary entries. He's done it now and again over the past 18 months. I rent a house in Boars Hill. He seems to be rather drawn to it. Bryony cut in. A house called Thelema, is that right? Yes. Edwards looked stunned for a moment. I didn't realize you knew about it. Oh, we know about it. Who owns it? I rent it from an agency. It's a big old place, far too big for me. But there's a lab on the top floor, and that suits my needs very well. Do your needs include baking soda? Asked Steve. Pardon? Never mind. Let's just get this story out, shall we? It's not the sort of place you'd want to live in on a regular basis, so I'm not there all the time. I also have a small house in Summertown, but Adrian found he could get into Thelema. You can't lock up a house like that properly, see? There's windows everywhere, and most of the frames are in pretty poor condition. You can easily force them open. Bryony interrupted. There's some very rare stick insects in that house. Where do they come from? You've searched the place, haven't you? Adrian turned up with one of them and gave it to me, so I put it in the lab. It looked like a bit of a prize. Then a couple of weeks later I found another one. They kept turning up, and I worked out it was his way of leaving a calling card. He gets in and uses the place as a doss house, basically. First few times it happened, I decided to just let it go. But recently he's been turning up a lot, and he's got much worse. He's very aggressive. Len came to see me on Sunday and said he thought Gill might have killed someone. He didn't say who, but I've never seen Len look so rattled. Bryony intervened again. Leonard Croydon told some other friends he had to leave Oxford on Sunday night. Do you know where he was going? All I know is he hasn't come back. I drove up to Thelema last night and I saw Len's car outside, but when I went in, Adrian was there. He was wearing Len's jacket, and he was in a state. Really excitable, keyed up. I asked him what he was doing there, and he took a swipe at me, pulled his belt off and lashed at me with it. The buckle cut me. I fell against the wall, and he hauled me up and threw me down the stairs. Edwards shook his head, biting his lip. I got out of there. I just got out. I drove away as fast as I could. Why didn't you call the police straight away? Asked Steve. I don't know. I was scared. I probably had concussion. That guy spooks me. It's as if he's not quite human. There was a pause. Bryony and Steve exchanged glances. 2 8-year-old boys have been kidnapped, she said. We know they were in Thelema last night. The house has been searched under warrant. Is that what he was up to? He was acting like he was on hot bricks. Have you found the children? Not yet. Well, if there's any way I can help. You might have passed up your chance there, said Bryony. If you'd called us last night, we might have found them then. But since you've dropped in to see us, there's something else I'd like to ask you about. Do you remember where you were on Tuesday night? He looked puzzled. Why Tuesday night? I was at my flat in Summertown.
Can anyone confirm that?
Not that I can think of. I was doing some writing.
Do you know a Dr. Nash of the Pitt Rivers Museum?
I might have come across him, but I wouldn't say I know him.
Steve was getting edgy.
You don't seem to be terribly sure what you know, do you, Mr. Edwards? Tell me this. What were you doing last Friday evening?
Another pause. Edwards kept his eyes fixed on the desk and avoided looking at either of them.
That's slightly embarrassing. To do with a girlfriend. Claire Belmont.
He shook his head again.
Oh my, you are one step ahead, aren't you? One step ahead of whom, Mr. Edwards? Tell us about last Friday night.
Claire and I planned to go away for the weekend, but she insisted on bringing a friend, a girl called Sylvie, who just happens to work for one of the families Croydon works for. Coincidence. Oxford's a small world, especially where that kind of employment's concerned. The girl was a friend of Claire's. She had nothing to do with me. You went to collect Claire Belmont at her house on Friday night. What happened after that?
We were supposed to pick this other girl up in St. Giles, but she didn't turn up, so we just drove off on our own. We went down to the Vale of the White Horse and camped at the fort behind the White Horse Hill. Then we quarrelled. She wouldn't let me in the tent. And it was my tent, I should say, so I went and slept in the open, some distance away. During the night she gave me the slip. When I woke up, she was gone. So next morning I packed up the tent and drove back. I assumed she'd find her own way home. Though what business it is of the police, I don't know. Bryony picked up a pencil and started sliding her fingers down it, turning it over and over, while the silence dragged out. Mr. Edwards, did you arrange to meet Adrian Gill out at the Uffington Hill fort that night? Most certainly not.
But he turned up.
I caught sight of him. I told him to piss off.
What time was that?
Sometime in the night. I wasn't sleeping much.
But still Claire Belmont managed to give you the slip?
I didn't say I never slept at all.
So you saw Adrian Gill. Why didn't you mention that before?
He shrugged. I'm embarrassed about that night. Everything went wrong.
Do you know a Mr. Finch?
Edwards frowned. I think I've seen the name. Come to think of it, that might be the name of the landlord at Thelema.
Bryony looked at Steve again. He drew his chair a bit closer to Edwards.
Adrian Gill. Why does he take such an interest in you, do you think? I don't think he's interested. He just latches on to people. Like you. And Leonard Croydon. Who else? How should I know? Gets around, doesn't he? Bulls Hill, Uffington, Oxford. What's his game, then? Again, how should I know? The less I know about him, the better. But you do seem to know a lot about him, don't you? I don't know anything about him, except that he's a lunatic. Then why'd you introduce him to your friends? Who? Mr. Kevin Donnelly, for example. Donnelly's a psychologist. Adrian needed a psychologist. I was trying to get him off my back. I was hoping someone might have the sense to issue a committal order or something. Tell you what, Mr. Edwards, I take it it's Mr., is it, not Doctor? Mr. I haven't finished my DPhil yet. Mr. Edwards, we'll get a car to take you up to our headquarters in Kidlington. Someone there will fix you up with a cup of tea and a bun and maybe throw a couple of aspirin in for good measure to help clear your head. We'll have another talk to you later this afternoon. If we can't get any more sense out of you then, we'll give you a lift home. I told you, I don't want to go home. He knows where I live. Steve tipped his head to one side, eyes mischievous. And you'll be a sitting duck? Exactly. Well, to be honest, Mr. Edwards, you'll be more used to us that way, drawing chummy out of the woodwork than wasting our time telling bullshit stories about your adventures. He got up, scraping his chair deliberately, and put out a hand to help Edwards stand. Bryony went to organise a car and ran into Canning, negotiating his way through the front door with a large box. "Hold the door, will you?" he said. "There's 4 more of these to come. From Bulls Hill. Macready wants them gone through." The boxes were deposited in the middle of the room, where Steve immediately started to unpack them. "Books, mostly," he said, holding up an ancient-looking black-bound volume with the spine towards him. "Goetia, Clavicular Salomonis." He opened it. There's an inscription. To Edwin Stanton Finch, at the Portal, Versago, 1898. Clavicula Salomonis means the key of Solomon. It's Latin, but I don't know what Goetia means. He turned the pages. There's bits of Latin here and there, but the rest of it's written in some language I don't recognise, with a lot of hieroglyphics across the top. 1898. How old is this guy Finch? Unless this was a christening present, he must be in his 80s.
It's his father, you dope. Donnelly mentioned that Finch Senior was involved in the Golden Dawn movement. She sat cross-legged on the floor and began looking at the titles of the books. Alistair Crowley, The Tale of Arceus. Gustave Flaubert, The Temptation of St. Anthony. S. L. MacGregor Mathers, The Chemical Wedding of Christian Rosenkreutz. Arthur Edward Waite, The Rites and Mysteries of Goetic Theurgy. Goetic. What was that word you had again?
Goetia. Steve was rummaging through one of the boxes. I'm wondering if there might be a Latin dictionary somewhere here. They laid the books out on the floor, then unpacked the papers underneath them. There were pages and pages of handwriting, mostly just columns of words or names, none of which was recognisable. Some included diagrams, complicated geometric diagrams that looked quite technical, but also odd little patterns drawn freehand. Then, in an envelope at the bottom of the box, Bryony found some photographs, old black and white photographs of people in long robes with hoods over their faces. One showed a horned goat sitting on an altar wearing a fur-edged cape. A naked woman was prostrate before it, and masked figures stood around holding flame torches. Steve crouched to look over her shoulder. "Black magic," said Bryony. "That's what this is about." I prefer to use the term delusional behaviour. This whole thing is about delusional behaviour, that I'll grant you. But you'd better get a grip on yourself, Bryony. Don't get carried away by a lot of occult images. Thing about this case is, I'm reasonably confident we're going to catch the bloke who's done the killing. Who, I'm willing to bet, is the one who's abducted the Gleason boys. But what I'm starting to worry about is what'll happen when we get to court. You just can't afford to go adding in a lot of elaborate backstory.
So that's what you think this is? Elaborate backstory?
Basically, yes. The books we've got here were all published between 1895 and 1915. Those photos look like they belong to the same era. Right out of our frame.
Then what about the inscription on the stone? Why did it lead Nash and Crouch to track down a book about raising demons?
The stone's old. So is what's written on it. Bryony drew breath to argue, but Steve cut across her. Let's say we're dealing with someone who's got an interest in occult practices. If that information helps us track him down, well and good. But my advice is keep it out of court. And keep it out of your head. It's a distraction. What we need is evidence.
Just a minute. Who's looking for the Latin dictionary? You're every bit as fascinated as I am, I can tell. I remember on that Walker case when you stayed up all night reading about the Freemasons.
That may be, but Elsingham burst through the door. Have you heard? It came through on the radio in the car. Miles and Daniel Gleason just walked into the police station at Cumnor.
Bryony let out a whoop of relief and elation as every phone in the building seemed to start ringing at once. Chapter 34. "Open wide," said the nurse, pressing what felt like a piece of cardboard on Miles's tongue. "Good boy." She removed the thing and let him close his mouth. "Now let's get this nasty wet shirt off." He shivered as she put a thermometer under his arm and started listening to his chest with a cold stethoscope. He looked across at Daniel, who was having a grazed knee cleaned up by the doctor.
"You're quite a soldier, aren't you?"
said the doctor. Daniel poked his tongue out at Miles, causing him to giggle and then to cough. The nurse pulled back with the stethoscope, frowning at him. "Hey, that was right in my ears, young man. Dose of Ventolin will sort you out. You lost your puffer, then?" Her tone was sympathetic, as if this was some cause for personal grief. "That won't do, will it?" Daniel mimicked her, unnoticed by the doctor, who was occupied with wads of cotton wool and sticking plaster.
"I must say you're in remarkably good shape,"
said the doctor, as he finished with the elastoplast and began to peer into Daniel's eyes, using a funny-looking instrument with a little light in the top.
"Get off!"
Daniel suddenly jerked away, half falling off his seat and careering into Miles on his way to the door. The nurse, young and quick in her reflexes, moved to block his way. "Just a minute now. It's all right, Daniel. Calm down now. No one's going to hurt you." But the words were lost, as a wailing noise came out of Daniel's mouth, and he began pummeling at her with both fists. The doctor caught him by the elbows and held him as he continued to kick and shout, and Miles started crying mutely, which he'd been doing without realizing it for much of the past 12 hours. When they came out of the church, they'd had a big argument because they'd got lost in the woods again, and Miles said they shouldn't have hidden from the person who came in because it wasn't the visitor at all. It might have been someone who could take them home. Daniel said it wasn't his idea to hide from anyone, and it was all Miles's fault because Miles was a cowardly custard. Then, as they were going along the road, Daniel said he'd found the way out, and Miles said no, he had, and they were arguing like that when they walked into the police station, still tied together with the fishing line. Miles didn't know he was crying, but the policeman who came out to talk to them said he was, and gave him a big checked handkerchief that was already rolled in a ball. When Dr. and Mrs. Gleason came, the boys cried worse than anything, and Miles got tired of being hugged. He wanted to see Toffee, but they had to wait until the doctor gave them what he called the all clear. So Daniel started laughing and joking round to show everyone they were all right, and Miles laughed as well, but that made him cough. Now Daniel was making a scene. It would have been better had the doctor not held on to him like that, because that was how Smith had grabbed hold of him before he turned him upside down. Miles felt funny, a bit dizzy.
"Shut up, Daniel!"
he shouted. And Daniel said,
"Shut up yourself!"
The doctor took them back out to the room where their parents had been, but the only person there now was a man with a hat on.
"Are they leaving us here?"
asked Miles. "Of course not," said the doctor, who was now keeping a bit of a distance from Daniel. "Your father's waiting out there to take you home, and your mother's gone back to Woodstock to collect your things. This is Superintendent Macready from the police." The man got up from his seat and tipped his hat. "Miles and Daniel, pleased to meet you."
"We've got to go home now," said Daniel, "with our father." "Are you going to expel us from school?" asked Miles.
"I doubt it. Not this time. But I'd like to have a talk to you, perhaps at your home."
"That will be all right," said Daniel, "as long as we can have our dog with us."
"Naturally. I wouldn't dream of coming between a boy and his dog."
"She belongs to both of us,"
Miles pointed out.
"Is that right? I expect the three of you make a pretty good team."
"Yes," said Daniel. "I'm the oldest."
It was agreed that the interview should take place at the Gleasons' home, with only two of the police present, Bryony and Macready. The kitchen had been tactfully cleaned up, with 4 chairs placed around the small table, and an extra one for Gleason set back by the window. Cocoa and ginger biscuits had been laid on. Toffee went from Miles to Daniel, leaping up and panting ecstatically in their faces. It was clear to Bryony that both children were distressed, exhausted, and dealing with this in the only ways they knew how, by shifting around in their seats, changing the subject, making sudden demands, all the time hovering on the brink of a temper tantrum. Daniel told a rambling story from which a few essential facts could be deduced. They had been driven away from Oxford in a green car by a man who said his name was Smith. He said he was taking them to meet Leonard. At first Smith was funny, but then he started to get angry and shout. After a race through the countryside, at 100 miles an hour, Smith had stopped and pulled them out of the car, then led them up a hill in the mist to meet the visitor. They ran back to the car to hide from the visitor, and Smith came back and drove them off. Then later, when he stopped the car again, he said he'd smash up Daniel and Miles if they didn't do what he said, but Daniel had given him a big punch in the face.
"No, you did not," said Miles. "You couldn't even reach his face." "I could when he picked me up." "No, you couldn't, because he turned you upside down." "He did not," shouted Daniel, tears starting in his eyes. He picked you up and turned you upside down. That was when I kicked him, like this."
Daniel demonstrated several times against the leg of the table, then shifted into distraction mode by making Toffee jump for a biscuit held above her head.
"I think this dog needs a walk,"
said Macready, getting to his feet.
"Daniel, why don't you and your father take her for a run round the block, while we talk to Miles about how he came to lose his puffer?"
Obviously nothing was less interesting to Daniel than Miles's puffer, and he was up and out of the room before Miles had a chance to object. Left on his own, Miles seemed to cave in on himself. Bryony prompted him gently. "Tell us what happened after you got out of the house."
"We went all around and around in the woods. Then we heard running in the dark, and we couldn't see anything, so we hid next to a big tree until it was all quiet again. And then we got up again, and we were trying to find the way out, and all the time we thought there might be somebody following us. So when we saw the church, I said we should go in the church, because evil things don't come in the church. They're scared of the crosses and things."
"You went to sleep in there?" He nodded slowly.
"When it was morning, somebody came in, and we thought it was the visitor. But afterwards we decided it must have only been an ordinary person."
Miles was breathing noisily through this, and stopped to use the new puffer he'd been given. Macready patted him on the arm.
"You're doing well, Miles. You're quite safe now. It wasn't the devil who was after you, but a very bad man, and we're going to put him away behind bars. You're going to help us do that, aren't you?"
Miles nodded slowly.
"He locked us in the room upstairs. But we got out. We tied the sheets together, and we slid down them to the ground. It was freezing cold in the night, so we had to put the sheets around us."
"That was smart," Bryony said, "getting out of the window like that." Miles did some more slow nodding.
"At first we didn't want to go, because we thought the visitor was outside in the trees. But then there was a fight in the house. Another man came and there was a fight."
"Did you see what the other man looked like?" The nod changed to a shake.
"We heard him come inside the house, and then there was a lot of yelling."
"What sort of yelling?" asked Bryony. "Did you hear any of the things they said?" Another shake of the head.
"But I saw the blood come out when Smith hit him. It's my turn to take our dog for a run."
"Are you sure you didn't hear what they said?" Miles pushed his chin into his chest and said flatly,
"You're mad. What the fuck are you going to do with them?"
"Is that what he said?" Miles went back to nodding. "Can you tell us what Smith looked like?"
"He looked like the man in the wood. At first I didn't know it was him because he was being a friend, but when he picked Daniel up, I knew it was the same one. He's got roots on top of his head, like upside-down tree roots."
Miles squirmed.
"I want to go now."
"You had seen him before?"
We saw him in the woods, after we'd been up on the white horse."
The front door opened, and Toffee came rocketing back into the kitchen and jumped at Miles.
"Toffee's going to catch the murderer,"
he said, rubbing vigorously at her head and neck. Gleason followed up, piggybacking Daniel. Miles stood forward indignantly.
"I want to piggyback too."
Gleason released Daniel, swept Miles up into his arms, and gave him a long bear hug before swinging him round on his back for a ride. Bryony found Steve in the kitchen at Canterbury Road, eating doughnuts that had been brought round from the tuck shop.
"What have they told you, then?"
he asked, brushing sugary fingers on his jacket. She gave a brief summary, and he listened, staring at the floor.
"See?"
he said when she got to the end.
"See what I said about kidnapping? Is a crime that traps a perpetrator. So Edward says to Gil, 'You're mad. What are you going to do with them?'
Which means Edwards knew they were there, and he's an accessory.
And we're closing in. We get confession out of Edwards, and Gil's running on borrowed time. He's driving Croydon's Morris Minor. A description of it's gone out to every petrol station in the South Midlands. He'll run out sooner or later."
"He could swap cars."
"Even so, with the description we've issued, someone's going to spot him."
"But he's not a lone operator, Steve."
"You still after Finch?"
How can we ignore him?
I've done some homework up in the city library. Edwin Stanton Finch was a member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. You've heard of it?
Donnelly mentioned it, and there's a reference to it in Claire's diary.
Founded in 1888. A lot of society ladies and gents trying to rediscover the magic of Celtic Britain. Fancied themselves as mages and mediums. Half those books we were looking at were written by people who belonged to it. Aleister Crowley, Samuel MacGregor Mathers, Arthur Edward Waite. I matched the photos we found with those in a book about Crowley. They're pictures that were widely circulated.
Did you find out what Goetia means?
Latin word means howling. Goetia is a work with instructions for calling up the lesser demons. It's got all their names in it. No doubt Finch Senior was into all that. He's mentioned in several of the books I looked at. Poet and photographer. Even his house gets a mention. The Lemur was built in 1906. One of his poetry books has the same name. He died in 1920.
Then who owns the house now?
I found out who the agent is and rang him. The owner's William Stanton Finch, director of Stanton Pharmaceuticals.
That's it. It all connects.
It does, and it doesn't. The place has been rented out for 5 years on the agreement that some of the rooms are used for storage. Edwards has had the lease for the past 3. I'm betting he's a lot more involved with Gill than he admits, and now he's panicking, because Gill's gone over the edge. What we should do is save the follow-up interview for tomorrow. Let him go home tonight and sweat. We'll get the place watched closely, but play it very casual with him. You know, just tell him we'll have the patrol keep an eye open. Don't feel too safe, mate. That's the message.
Is that what they teach you in clinical psychology? How to manipulate people?
He shrugged. Part of the job. We want the outcomes, don't we?
Outcomes? Seems a funny word to use. I didn't think I was working in a sausage factory.
Way things are going, Bryony. No point being too concerned with the complications behind a case. Just get the convictions.
I can't see Macready subscribing to that principle.
Oh well, we'll see. Steve went through to join the other staff in the pub for a celebratory beer, but Bryony decided to go home. Not that home meant much at the moment. The Headington flat was characterless, and she'd really only used it as a place to sleep, but there was always the bath. She stopped off at Boots to buy some strawberry bubble bath and caught the bus. Just as she was sinking back into the foaming bath water, of course, the phone rang. She wrapped a towel round herself, already mentally programming the emergency dressing routine as she dived for the receiver.
"Bryony."
It was Gareth's voice.
"What are you doing? I didn't really expect to find you home.
Want to go out for a drink?" He said he'd come round for her in half an hour. A different kind of emergency dressing routine was called for. She raked through the wardrobe, bubbles sliding down her back as she went through one unlikely thing after another. She settled for a cream polo neck sweater and a pair of jeans that she pulled from a tumbled heap on the floor of the wardrobe. Gareth was right on time and stood on the doorstep looking slightly self-conscious.
"Thought we could just walk up the road to Headington," he said. "Have you found those kids?" "They turned up. Walked into the police station."
"Gemini."
"What?" "Castor and Pollux, heavenly twins. They're adventurers. They've got their feet in the Milky Way, so they're a lucky duo." "Didn't know you were an astrologer."
She shouldered her bag and pulled the door shut.
"I've been reading about that memory system. Very interesting. But it's not the sort of thing you can just pick up from a few quick tips. To start with, you have to know your zodiac signs. They're the basis for your organizing system, see? Everything you want to learn or remember you have to link into a system of images, so you start with the zodiac. Principle is, you think of the mind as a universe. Star patterns are part of the structure. Gets you pretty spaced out reading that stuff. You know, I reckon you could get quite a high out of it. Like with a drug. Have to be a pretty special sort of drug. But drugs only rot your brain anyway. This is supposed to be a way of getting it to work better. It's a slow process, though. It'd be hard work. So no quick outcomes." "What do you mean?" "Nothing. Just a colleague of mine's been going on about outcomes. This is more about putting things in and getting things out. If you do the work properly, over time,
everything changes. Sitting in the pub, surrounded by groups of laughing people, Bryony felt as if she'd been living the life of another species. Gareth came back with a second round of drinks, abandoned his seat opposite her, and moved across to share the bench she was sitting on. "What's up? You look worried." She took a sip of her wine. "Murders to solve. Sorry, I seem to have lost a few social skills along the way somewhere." "That's what I like about you. I'm not big on social skills myself, but I get the feeling we sort of click." He spoke quietly, and the Welsh inflection took over. "Is that right?" She nodded, smiling, and he moved closer, gently pushing the hair back from her face. Chapter 35. Sunday, 28th September, 1974. James Edwards did not turn up for his 9 o'clock interview. At 1:15, a car was sent for him, but the doorbell wasn't answered. At 9:30, Bryony and Steve were there themselves, on the doorstep of his Summertown terrace. The green Porsche was parked outside between 2 police cars. "We've had that front door under observation all night," said the patrol sergeant. "We saw him go in, but otherwise there's been no comings or goings." "OK," said Steve. "Out of the way, Bryony. This is one for the boys." He and the sergeant shouldered the door open, and she followed them into the hallway. "Mr. Edwards," she called. "You there?" They found him upstairs, lying across his bed, with his head dangling over the end. The body was face down, but the head had been wrenched around on the neck so that a contorted purple face stared at them as they entered the room. She and Steve stood side by side, taking in the details. The bedclothes were pulled right down, as if he'd been hauled around, dragging them with him. But he was still wearing the clothes they'd seen him in yesterday. "Too afraid to get undressed?" said Bryony. "All right," said Steve. "It's my fault. I'll take the rap for this one." "It's both our fault. We were trying to be too smart. You call Macready, I'll call Pavan." Pavan got there first, took one look at the body and shook his head. "Not possible. One person couldn't have done this alone. Look." He pointed to a pattern of bruising on the arm that lolled over the edge of the mattress. "Someone held him, while someone else twisted his neck. Just that alone would take almost superhuman strength." Feeling utterly wretched, Bryony went to take a look round the house. How had they got in? The front door was out of the question, but there was a back door with a heavy bolt that had been drawn open. Edwards would not have left the door unbolted. An ugly scenario was forming in her mind. Whoever it was had already got into the house before he arrived home, before the police surveillance began. After committing the murder, it had been easy enough for them to let themselves out the back way. She went into the small square of garden, which was bounded by a brick wall, with other gardens on all 3 sides. It would be easy to make a discreet getaway. She went back into the house to face up to Macready, whose arrival was announced by the siren. "Very well, Williams," he said briskly. "You may leave this to me. You're needed elsewhere. It appears our friend Claire Belmont has discharged herself from hospital and gone adventuring again with the young lady who drives a car with a skull and crossbones on the bonnet. Elsingham is waiting outside." In a way, it was a welcome reprieve. "Here we go again," said Elsingham as he fired up the engine. "No rest for the wicked. Where to?" "Hannah's wanting to try out a bit of psychodrama. They've probably gone to Wayland's Wood." Gusts of wind and rain assaulted the car with increasing strength as they headed south into the Vale of the White Horse. Thank goodness this time she was prepared with her own scarf and gloves. Elsingham was evidently thinking along the same lines. "Got me Parker in the back," he said. "Saves on the tea cosies." The gusts had become lashings by the time they drew into the parking lot below Wayland's smithy. There was only one police car here now, and Bryony was willing to bet the officers supposed to be guarding the crime scene had taken refuge in it. She went over, knocked on the window, and showed her ID. "Haven't seen an orange Mini around, have you? It's got a skull and crossbones painted on the bonnet.
Bit further up, Gov. 2 women in it. We told them not to cross the yellow ribbon. Didn't think they'd get up to any mischief. They said they just wanted to take some photos of the barrow.
All right. Get someone up there, will you? It's supposed to be under guard. She left the officers buttoning on their capes and strode ahead, the rain driving directly into her face. This place had a way about it, no question. It seemed to harbour weather that grew huge and strange, as if it were trying to force you out, back to your little shelter in the city. After a quick look back to confirm that Elsingham and the other officers were following, she ducked under the yellow tape and walked along the edge of the wood. It was no longer gold and orange. Everything had gone muddy brown. The fallen leaves had turned to sludge.
"Claire?"
she called.
"Hannah!"
A small figure in a purple coat emerged from among the trees ahead, making arm signals of the kind you'd use on an airfield. Bryony made her way across to meet her at the far end of the wood, and came out near the barrow, meeting a new assault from the rain as she left the partial shelter of the trees.
"Come on,"
Hannah beckoned, screwing up her face against the weather.
"Hurry up!"
She picked her way rapidly past the great sarsens at the entrance, some of which were pitted with what looked like giant wormholes, and dived into a square of blackness framed by grey stone. Bent double, all Bryony registered at first was that the ground underfoot was dry, and that everything had gone quiet. The noise of the wind and rain was suddenly remote. As she got further in, she was able to adjust to a moderate stoop, and saw that she was in a narrow but well-shaped cave. Claire was sitting cross-legged in a niche to the right, near where a shaft of light cut through. Opposite, surrounded by an ocean of blanket, sat Wade. He motioned for Bryony to take a place, and Hannah tucked herself into another niche at the head of the barrow.
"You're not supposed to be here,"
muttered Bryony as she settled herself on the ground. "You've breached the cordon." Wade made a half-turn towards her and spoke quietly.
"Police aren't the authorities in here, whatever they might think. There's other kinds of lines you can cross."
Elsingham's silhouette appeared in the mouth of the barrow. "Come in here," said Bryony. "Tell the officers to keep a watch outside." When he was settled, there was a moment of quiet.
"Good,"
said Wade, his voice so low it was barely audible.
"Now we can start. Wayland's Cave is a safe place, and it's filled with peace. Everyone here is going to respect that. Claire has asked for help. She's been places she doesn't know she's been, and seen and heard things that are blocked off, and she wants to do some unblocking. We're here to guard her and to see what comes."
He motioned for Claire to move closer so she could sit facing him, an arm's length away.
"Close your eyes," he said, "and feel where you are, right here in your body, with the breath coming through you. Now we're going on a journey, and all manner of things might cross your path. If you come upon anything that you don't like or don't trust, you bring it back here to the earth. There's earth all around you, and it holds strong no matter what. You're going to sleep now, but you're never going to lose the feel of your body against the ground, or the air in your lungs. All right, keeping your eyes closed, look around. Tell me where you are and what you see."
"I'm on top of the hill. It's a clear night. I can see the sky, the white horse."
"We know about all that,"
whispered Hannah.
"She got knocked out. Ask her what happened after that."
Wade raised a hand for quiet.
"Something hits you, Claire. What happens after that?"
Claire's voice was flat and low.
"She's tied up. She can't move. It's day and then it's night. Someone's talking. When you hear my voice, you're awake again. When you hear my voice, you're asleep again.
You won't remember anything I say."
"Who's talking? Can you see?"
There was no response. Bryony moved closer to her. "You're tied up, is that right?" she said. Claire's head turned in her direction, but the eyes seemed to look straight through her. "You told us a story about Andromeda, chained up as the beast is coming for her." "The beast is coming for her." "But she escapes. She's rescued." "She gets free." "Where does she go?" "Into the stars." Claire began to get to her feet. "I'm going to go now." Wade gently pushed her back to a sitting position.
"That's all right. Where are you going?"
She put her hands over her ears and remained with her head clasped between them for some time, until Wade gently put them back in her lap.
"Where are you now, Claire?"
"I'm in a room, sitting in a chair. When you hear my voice, you wake. When I say sleep, you sleep. It's almost dark, but there's still some light coming through the window beside me. Hello, Claire."
"Someone's talking to you," said Wade. "Who is it? Can you see him?"
She shook her head slowly. "I can only see myself. There's a mirror in front of me, reflecting the window and reflecting me sitting in the chair. I can hear breathing, hot breath on my hair. Hello, Claire." The voice is behind me, but it doesn't belong to the one who's breathing on me. It's further away. I'm thirsty. Bring her a drink. Someone gives me a cup with milk in it.
"Who?"
The one who moves fast. But he snatches it away before I've finished, so the last bit spills on me. Then something is put in my hand, smooth and round, cold and heavy. Look at it, Claire. It's looking up at me. The eye in the stone. It can see me. Now look in the mirror. I see a woman sitting, facing me. She's shining. It's dark all around her, but she's shining and strong. The most beautiful woman I've ever seen. Now, do you see yourself? This is the first lesson of the true magic. Sleep now."
Claire's head dropped to her chest, but she continued speaking.
"We're going on a journey."
"And what does the voice say now?"
"You are walking along the canopic way, between the gate of the sun and the gate of the moon. This is where I found my teacher, Claire, when I was 24 years old, like you. I walked through the streets of the city for 5 days and 5 nights, and when on the 5th morning I saw the dust streaming across the surface of the street, while around my face and shoulders there was no wind at all, I knew that he was coming. An old woman steps from her house, looks about her, and steps back inside, shooting the bolt after her. Then there are 2 children coming towards me, boys in ragged clothes with bare feet, doubles. Around their feet the dust gathers and swirls. I pass between them into a place where there is no light, only sound and movement. The wind rises from the earth, whipping round my shins, then catching at the fabric of my clothes, seeking the nakedness underneath, pushing its way into my ears and nostrils, forcing open my mouth and screaming into my lungs so I can't scream back, and I am like a man on the rack, stretched out as my limbs try to fly apart. That is how he teaches me his power and opens the way to mine. In front of you now, Claire, is a doorway. The doorway is a black hole in the wall. Walk through. I'm in the dark there, and I hear knocking. Then I hear voices. Then just the dark. But the knocking comes again, louder, and I'm in the chair again, in the empty room. I'm cold. They've taken my shoes, and the floor's rough against my feet. The voice has stopped, but I can hear people shouting at each other. "What are they saying?" asked Bryony. But Wade put his finger to his lips.
"She's in deep now," he said. "One voice is enough. All right, Claire. There's people shouting at each other. What can you hear?"
Claire's breathing became intense again, and her words were strangled, as if she were trying to shout in a dream.
"You put him up to it. I have to know. I have to know if it was you. You don't have to know anything of the kind. Stay on your course. What course? The course you've set me on? The course that leads straight to hell? What are you, anyway?"
There was a pause. Wade adjusted his blanket and moved forward a little. "Who's saying that?" There was no response. He waited a while and then asked, "Where are you now?"
"In a car."
"What kind of car?"
"Van. A white van."
"Can you see where you are?"
"I can see the house we're driving away from. There's a green door. A long driveway with white flowers in the hedge. Another car is following. I can hear its engine starting. He drives fast, twisting and turning on the roads, then over some rough ground. Stops. Sleep now. I'm walking in my sleep, walking in the leaves. They're all around me, swaying and rustling. The leaves are gold. He's coming now. The shadow with the white eyes is standing there, and I can see an ordinary man who's shouting and crying. Then he's screaming."
Claire put her hands over her ears again and clenched her eyes shut.
"I don't like the noise. Screaming and screaming. I don't like it. I don't want it."
Suddenly the tension went out of her, and she slumped against the wall. Wade left her for a moment, then said firmly, "It's over now."
"No, it's not,"
answered a rasping voice that didn't seem to be Claire's at all. She sat bolt upright. A smile spread across her face, but it was more like an expression of nervous strain than any form of human communication. Her eyes began to move rapidly, to the right, to the left. Then the words came again in low, slurred phrases.
"Wayland's revenge. I'll give it you. You come looking for it. I'll give it to you. Got him by the scruff. Pulls out of his jacket. Catch him by the neck. Smack, smack. Shut up whining. Shut up choking. Clever Dick. Brains coming out through his mouth. That's what I call talking clever. Spitting grey and white stuff. First he's down, then he's getting up again. Sucker for punishment. Give him a smack. Still twitch him. Give him a good whacking."
The frozen smile twisted and collapsed as a wailing noise came out of Claire's mouth. Her own voice seemed to return to her now.
"I don't want that. I don't want that. I don't want that."
She began to sob.
"I thought I might be dreaming. I woke up in the mist and there was no one there, but I could still hear the screams. It was all I could hear."
Wade put a hand on her shoulder. "All right, Claire. It's all over now. You can come back. Come on." Claire swayed as if she were climbing.
"It's cold,"
she said. A violent shivering passed through her body, then stopped. Wade took the blanket from his shoulders and wrapped it around her. When they arrived back at the Reddleton barn, Bryony left Hannah and Claire in the hands of a friendly-looking policewoman, while she and Elsingham took Wade through to the interview room. Wade seemed to enjoy the decor. He leant against the table, looking round. "I always said Mr. Rusty was a druid, and Dougal, a true bard."
"Please take a seat, Mr. Bowman,"
Bryony said pointedly.
"Told you before. It's Wade."
He spun the wooden chair on one of its legs before depositing himself on it. Bryony felt the need to restore things to an official footing. "I've just taken a big professional risk allowing that little scene to go ahead," she said briskly. "Now I have to proceed properly from here."
"I don't see how allowing comes into it. Claire asked me for help."
"You were trespassing." He wagged a fat finger at her.
"Oh, no. Now, if you want proper procedure, you'd better get your facts right. I know more about trespass than most of the police around here. The barrow's public right-of-way, and the crime scene cordon doesn't include it. I checked."
"Who with?"
"One of your blokes in the fancy suits."
"Well, that's something. Now, about this hypnotism."
"I'm not the one who hypnotized her. I was bringing her out."
He stretched his legs and folded his hands over his stomach.
"From what she said, there's 2 people involved. maybe more. One of them's very violent, and he seems to think he's Wayland the Smith.
Adrian. That's Adrian.
They found him yet?
Not that I've heard.
Probably gone to ground because of the weather. I'll keep a lookout.
You and half the police in the South Midlands? What do you make of the other person involved in this?
I'd say he's an adept, used to dealing with the spirit worlds.
That's not the kind of offence we can charge anyone with. We don't have laws about the spirit world. We need evidence.
Why don't you drive through the villages around Fifield Down and check on the houses with green doors and white bushes? You might try Fifield, West Overton, Smeaton. He got up. I'll be around if you need me. Your people have got my phone number.
She sat and thought for a minute after he'd left, then looked at Elsingham, who was toying with the pencil he'd just sharpened. So what's your take on it? He frowned.
Well, it's obvious there's two people involved, but what about the arguments? Someone seems to have interrupted them, and then gets bashed. Who was that?
Leonard Croydon?
Fits, doesn't it?
Elsingham pulled a sheet of paper towards him and made dots with the pencil. Especially since Daniel Gleeson mentioned that the man who kidnapped them was wearing Leonard Croydon's jacket, said Bryony, not to mention driving his car. What was Croydon doing down here?
Asking questions.
Bryony frowned at the jotting of the pencil. You're the one who spoke to Croydon that first morning. What was he like then?
Shocked. But you'd expect that, wouldn't you? The way I read it, he wasn't nervous. He was upset.
Stop that dotting business, Elsingham. It's depressing me. I wouldn't mind dots if I thought I could join them.
Well, what if that's what he was doing? Putting two and two together? And he came down here to find out whether he got the right answer.
From who? Nobody in their right mind would go asking Adrian Gill questions. He'd have come to talk to Finch.
Maybe. But when Gill took off in the car, he must have followed. Saw there was another girl in trouble and decided to play the hero.
Or just didn't think, said Bryony. A decent bloke thinking he's seeing hell break loose and he's caught up in it. Let's think timing. Croydon leaves Oxford on Sunday night. Something happens down here that night or Monday. Gill's stirred up even more. He goes back to Oxford. He'd do that, wouldn't he, if Croydon gave him cause to think people were on his trail? Elsingham dropped the pencil on the table and leaned back in his chair.
And within 24 hours, he's figured out who's doing what. Then he goes into action on Tuesday night.
So what's the other bloke doing all this time? Finch?
I reckon he's the one figuring it all out.
So do I. Half the Thames Valley force and most of the Wiltshire lot were on the prowl. The call was out to bring in Adrian Gill. His description was broadcast on the radio news at lunchtime, and his known haunts were under constant watch. Macready was ready enough to approve a hunt for the house Claire had been taken to, but emphasised that if Gill was apprehended at any time, Bryony would be required immediately for the interrogation. She requested the assistance of Jeffreys and Shipway. It was an operation across the Wiltshire border, and for local knowledge they were hard to beat. The weather was still appalling, so any remaining white flowers in the hedgerows looked bedraggled and grey, and it was hard to see the colour of anyone's front door, which meant they had to curb crawl. "I'm sorry," said Claire, after they'd spent over half an hour churning through the gutters. "I'm not being a great help, am I?" They were driving out of Smeaton, the last of the villages in the immediate area of Fifield Down, when Bryony noticed a line of trees ahead that looked as if they belonged to a garden. Jeffreys drew up so they could look along the driveway. On one side was a bedraggled garden with overgrown rose bushes surrounding a bird bath. On the other was a hawthorn hedge, in which the remains of a few white flowers were still visible. The house was large, but compact. A Regency brick residence, more likely to have been built for a landowning aristocrat than a farmer. As the drive swerved round to the entrance, they saw a green front door with a portico surround. "I think so," said Claire. "Oh, yes, I think so." Bryony got out and rang the doorbell. No answer. The rain, now teeming rather than lashing, was streaming down the windows, but they did a cursory tour of the building, looking inside where they could. At the back was a square-paned window, through which, with the aid of a torch, Bryony could see a small room with bare floorboards, a single chair, and a long mirror. "Right," she said. "We need a search warrant." Chapter 36. Macready paid a brief visit during the search of the house, but looked distinctly sceptical about the prospects of finding any useful evidence. In contrast to Thelema, this house was orderly and conventionally arranged. No obscene statues, no amateur chemistry labs, no mysterious deposits of white powder. Instead, there were files of business correspondence for the pharmaceutical company Finch owned, shelves of bound scientific papers, a drinks cabinet. But surely it's taking coincidence too far to believe that Claire happened to pick on a place owned by the man Donnelly warned us about.
"Coincidence is not a persuasive factor in court, Williams," Macready said brusquely. "A good defence lawyer might convert it into accusations of conspiracy to frame his client. As far as evidence is concerned, we remain in Dr. Pavantanandan's capable hands." There was a general mood of gloom and irritability among the team, something fostered by the weather, but also perhaps an inevitable swing from the elation of yesterday afternoon. Latham sat morosely in Macready's car, listening for news from the control room. "When we've got Gill," he said, "we've got the case." Like Macready, he was doubtful about Claire's identification of the house, and Bryony had avoided mentioning how she'd come to remember it. The episode in the Long Barrow had doubtless been traumatic for her, but oddly enough, Claire seemed to be growing in confidence as she walked around the house, then returned to the room at the back. "This is the only place I recognise," she said. "Why don't you sit in the chair?" Hannah suggested. "Might trigger a few more memories, you never know." "Wait," said Pavan. "I'll have to cover it." He put a sheet of plastic over the chair, and Claire sat, looking poised and regal. The mirror, which was unframed and propped against the wall, gave a full-length reflection. "There were 2 people in here with me," she said. "One I didn't see, he was just a voice. The other was the man I saw on the White Horse Hill, the one who pulled the tent out. He was tall, exceptionally so, and he had his hair tied up on top of his head. It was coiled up into—" She turned to Hannah. "What do they call that style where the hair's all twisted and matted?" "Dreadlocks."
"Yes, it was in dreadlocks." "There's nothing else you can tell us about the second man?" asked Bryony. "Older? It was an older voice, but strong. A good chest voice, we'd call it." She looked at Hannah again. "I feel I'm still hearing it. Can we get out of here?" "Go back to Oxford," said Bryony. "Both of you. I'll contact you if we have any more breakthroughs." "No way," said Hannah. "I'd rather go back and join the search party." Claire got to her feet and looked out of the window. "So would I. I feel as if I need to be with Wade." Bryony followed them out and had a word with Shipway at the door. "They want to go back and join the search party. Can you stay with them?" Shipway tipped her cap, half humorously. "They'll be safe with us, Inspector, and they can spend the night at my cottage if need be. We've got 4 dogs to warn us of any intruders." When they'd gone, Bryony had a brief discussion with Pavan. "We'll need something forensic to corroborate Claire's story that she was brought here," she said. "I don't think Macready's convinced."
"Rather," said Pavan. "I think he doubts that a jury would be convinced. I'll have this chair removed and examined."
Bryony left the house with Elsingham and got in the car feeling disconsolate.
"Now what?"
he said. She sat and thought for a moment. "Museum. I've got this idea it was Finch I saw in the Avebury Museum. We agreed he might be the one following the movements of the inquiry, right? So maybe that was no coincidence." Some efficient work through the radio control room ensured that a car had gone to collect the curator from his home, so he was there to meet them when they arrived. He was a tubby man with round spectacles who blinked a lot as he introduced himself. "Noel Walsh. We can talk in here," he said, leading them into a small room with walls covered in black and white aerial photographs of the land. "It's how they found
a lot of the smaller stone circles and barrows, from flyovers during the First World War. You can see the shape of them in a way you can't at ground level. Now, how can I assist you?
We're seeking information about a local resident, William Finch. Do you know him?
Yes. He comes here quite a lot for his research. I helped him with some documents about William Stukely. Fascinating character, Stukely.
I'm sure he is, but I need to stick to Finch for the moment. What do you know about him?
The family's local. It goes back as far as the parish records. They owned a lot of land round here, or round West Overton, and the Stantons had a big farm at Lockridge, so intermarriage made them the main landowners west of Avebury. The Stanton Finches had a reputation for being fiercely religious. They were Calvinists, and they didn't like Stukely trying to resurrect the stone circles. John Finch rounded up a mob to try to stone him out of town. That was a couple of centuries ago, and the tables have turned since.
In what way? Asked Bryony.
Edwin Stanton Finch, William's father, rebelled. He was supposed to go into the church, but he got into some occult society instead and moved to Oxford. It's only a few years ago that William moved back to the area. I think we might have one of Edwin's books in the storeroom. I'll fetch it while you have a look at this.
He opened a drawer and brought out a bulky volume with an embossed leather binding.
Antiquarian's Register. My uncle started compiling it.
Bryony flicked through and located 2 short entries. Edwin Stanton Finch, 1882 to 1920. B.A. Oxon. Poet, photographer, and member of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. His volumes of poetry include Archon, 1907, Chaos, 1908, The Tangled Grove, 1911, and Thelema, 1914. William Stanton Finch, 1911. B.A. Oxon, M.D., Ph.D., University of Bologna. Chemist and pharmaceutical advisor, director of Stanton Pharmaceuticals. Interests in folklore and prehistoric monuments. Son of Edwin Stanton Finch. There were sounds of shifting and rummaging in the next room, and Bryony waited anxiously as the minutes ticked by. When Walsh reappeared, he was holding a thin, rather mouldy-looking volume with the title The Tangled Grove etched on it in faded letters. She opened it and was faced with a drawing of a spreading tree with gold and crimson leaves. The branches crossed each other in oddly curving shapes to create the impression of eyes framed in the spaces between them. Under the drawing was a line of print. The tree whose sap is blood draws its true worth from the ground. She turned the pages, which were thick and unevenly cut. There were no more illustrations, and most of the so-called poems were strings of incomprehensible words or names. The last page bore the heading Visitors, but the text underneath was just like the rest. Akeldama heru rara, ihu od, erihu asmode, erihu zagan, zagan salutor, nihi naga phonias berith gusion, vazago salutor, sigil salomonis, decarabia andras marex, omnes vaton nemoni isi nunquam, omnes obstrudo, defixi sunt. She passed it to Walsh. Any idea what that's about? He studied it and shook his head.
Bits of Latin I can recognize, but it's a hodgepodge. Wouldn't get too involved with it if I were you.
Why do you say that?
No particular reason. Just looks like nonsense, that's all. And I thought you might be interested in this. It was inside the front cover of the book.
He handed her a folded, mottled page with heavy black print on it. On 1st May, at Ashdown House, arias from Saul, The new oratorio by Mr. George Frederick Handel, first performed to wide acclaim at the King's Theatre in London, will be sung in the presence of the composer by Mr. Thomas Stanton Finch, Saul, and Mr. Matthew Stukely, David. Carriages at 10. I don't know who Matthew Stukely was, but he was almost certainly a relative of William. Interesting, in view of what we've been talking about. I saw a production of Saul a couple of years ago. It's about Saul's deadly resentment of David, as a consequence of which Saul goes to the devil, essentially. As soon as Elsingham started the car, the radio crackled into life.
Tango Bravo to B23. Wiltshire Control have sent through an urgent message. Adrian Gill's been brought into Marlborough Police Station.
Elsingham cheered and began beating out the rhythm of I'm a lumberjack and I'm okay on the steering wheel. Other details were fed through over the radio as they drove to Marlborough. Gill had been found wandering on Hackpen Hill, where Sean had made his reappearance on Friday morning. But this was no police triumph. It was Wade who had brought him in, delivering him to Marlborough Police Station in his jeep.
"Stone the crows," commented Elsingham. "He was taking a risk, wasn't he?"
Adrian Gill was sitting handcuffed under the guard of 2 hefty officers, with a towel over his head, as if someone had been attempting to dry him off, but thought better of it.
"Get that thing out of the way," ordered Macready. "Let the man show his face, for God's sake."
One of the officers darted forward, snatched at the towel, and immediately stepped back again, as if he'd been approaching a hyena. Macready walked round and leant against the desk to confront the captive.
"So, Mr. Gill, we meet at last. You've been a busy man."
Gill's hair had fallen about his face in thick, sodden tendrils. He was wearing the remains of a T-shirt and jeans that were heavy with mud around the lower leg. His feet were bare.
"Where are his shoes?"
snapped Macready. There was some bustling out in the corridor, and a sergeant arrived with a collection of plastic bags containing Gill's shoes, belt, and the jacket he'd been wearing. Macready took the shoes out and inspected the soles, then exchanged some whispered words with the sergeant. D.S. Foster's work might have clinched the case after all, at least at this critical juncture. And if the jacket was Croydon's, there were sufficient grounds already to charge him with 2 of the murders. His belt had been removed as a precaution, but if he'd used it as a weapon, that too might provide forensic evidence. Nailing him for the kidnap would depend on the consistency of the boy's testimony, but they would surely have no difficulty identifying him. The room they were in looked like a large holding cell, with its grey walls, caged light bulb, and narrow strip of high window, cross-hatched with wire mesh. 3 metal-framed chairs were set at the table across from Gill. Macready took the centre position, with Bryony on his right and Latham on his left, and ordered the 2 uniformed officers to wait outside.
"Now, Mr. Gill," he began, "do you know what day it is?" "Mabon." "The feast of Mabon has been and gone. Do you know what day of the week it is?"
Gill took a while to answer, but eventually said,
"Sunday."
"Sunday," Macready echoed. "We are interested in what you have been doing over the past week."
"Travelling."
Gill looked both confused and subdued. His head hung forward, and his whole body seemed weary and heavy, but at the same time, Bryony thought, everything about him was hard. The sinewy arms and hands, wiry hair, blank staring eyes, the rasping sound of his breathing.
"You do a deal of travelling, don't you, Mr. Gill? Do you visit Wayland the Smith's Long Barrow in your travels?"
"That's my place."
"Did you meet Leonard Croydon at Wayland's smithy?"
"He was there."
"And he spoke to you? What was that about?"
"Business."
"What kind of business, Mr. Gill? Mr. Croydon was upset, wasn't he?"
"He's finished."
"Is that right? How was he finished?"
"I finished him."
"I see. How did you do that, Mr. Gill?"
"Smashed. I smashed him." Simple as that. A murder confession. There was no expression in the face or voice, and no movement in the body, just a few sparse words. Bryony had never witnessed an interview subject so lacking in reaction or resistance as the questioning continued. Macready put a jagged lump of flint rock on the table. Leonard Croydon was killed with these. Stones.
Bigger ones. Works quicker when you've got 'em still.
When you've got what still?
Squealers!
There was silence. Macready turned the stone over so its smooth black curves showed. The buzzy fiend control. Have you heard that expression, Mr. Gill? Gill stared at him blankly. Very well, Gill. Let us continue with your adventures. You finished, Mr. Croydon, with one of these.
Bigger!
Gill's voice suddenly jumped in volume, startling all of them. One of the officers by the door started forward, but Macready gestured for him to stay put. Of course, bigger ones.
Those are for chucking, if you got squealers moving.
Go on. There was silence again. Macready broke it with a different tap, asking about his visits to Alcon Close. Within half an hour, Gill had confessed to the murders of Sylvie Beck, Leonard Croydon, James Edwards, Jessica Parks, and Amanda Mason. He admitted to taking Miles and Daniel Gleason for a ride. After that, he asked for a break. As soon as Gill had left the room, Steve made a triumphant little drumming phrase with his fingers on the tabletop. We've still got a lot to get out of him, he said. There was only a hint about the killings at the Pit Rivers, but it was a significant hint. He said enough already to convince a jury he knows what only the killer knew. Well, I'm nosed. Macready was scratching behind his ear. A most curious young man. Doesn't add up, said Bryony. She turned on Steve. You're supposed to be the psychologist. What's his motive for any of this? Steve lit a cigarette and inhaled with his eyes closed. I'd say he's not operating off conscious intentions. He's motivated at the level of raw instinct, mainly by fear. Fear of whom? Fear of what? What did he have to fear from any of his victims? Steve wedged the cigarette in the corner of his mouth while he used his hands to count off the points. Sylvie Beck saw him killing Parks or Mason. Leonard Croydon knew about Sylvie Beck. James Edwards dobbed him into us. But he's just dobbed himself into us, without so much as a dodge or a weave. You're not getting the point, Bryony. This isn't about conscious, rational thought processes. It's about paranoid reactions and chemical interference with cognitive function. You mean drugs? And someone's supplying him, or not just with the junk Sean buys up at the Barbary Castle toilet block. Someone's dosing him and controlling him through it. Finch is behind the whole thing. Macready tapped a pencil sternly on the desk. Adrian Gill has barely begun to tell his story. Who knows what may emerge over a few days of careful questioning? But right now I want to speak to Mr. Bowman. Call him in, Williams. Wade entered the room, stood looking up at the narrow strip of window, and took his time before turning to greet Macready and Latham. Mr. Bowman, Macready began. Wade. Sir, you've done a sterling job bringing Adrian Gill in here. I hope you also realise that you were putting yourself in considerable danger. He's offered no resistance. I talked to him first, to calm him down. It wasn't ideal circumstances, with the rain tipping down and only a bit of canvas over the jeep, but we had a chat. What about? Let's say we talked about his travels. Go on. He's out of his mind. That's how he's travelling. But I didn't get very far finding out about it. I'll try again later. Will you indeed? Gill will be holding his conversations with the police over the next few days. Charges are being prepared as we speak. He's an extremely dangerous man. So you just said. He thinks he's Wayland the Smith. Who gave him that idea, do you think? We'll be asking him where he got the idea from, said Steve. But you might help us with a few practical details. The car he was driving. It belonged to one of his murder victims.
It was found just off the ridgeway on Monkton Down. I know. We passed it in the jeep. I found him about 3 miles up from there, drenched to the skin. Exactly what time was this? I don't carry a watch. By the sun, I'd say a bit before 3. He's a drug taker. Did you see any signs of that about him? Can't say I did. Wade turned his eyes on Bryony. Have you found that place Claire was taken to? Bryony felt a burning sensation spread across her face. Yes, we think we have. Good. That's important. Let me know if I can help, won't you? The last question was addressed exclusively to her. I should be getting off now. Cattle to feed. Macready stood up and held out a hand. Thank you again, Mr. Bowman. Perhaps you'd return here after you've done your work with the animals. We may need to ask you further questions. As Wade lifted himself out of the inadequate little chair, Bryony stared at it, thinking that perhaps she should offer to sit there now and face the Inquisition. Macready's expression, as he turned from closing the door, was thunderous. How is it that Mr. Bowman is informed about the searches we have been conducting this afternoon? Bryony drew a slow breath. It was Wade who got that information out of Claire in the first place. She asked him to help her bring back some of the memories from the past few days. And you're witness to this? I was, sir, yes. Why was Mr. Bowman privileged with this role of confidant? He's the Druids' leader. He knows a lot about local beliefs and legends. I'm aware of that. Beliefs and legends, however, will do nothing to assist our case in court. Do you realise that this may have contaminated vital evidence? It wasn't my idea, sir. They were already underway with it when I arrived. With what? Macready asked. With the recollection process. The recollection process. I will be asking Mr. Bowman about that. Where did this take place? In Wayland Smith's Long Barrow, Bryony admitted. Macready got up and swept out of the room. Steve stayed put, and to avoid his questions, Bryony went to look for the ladies' toilet. She splashed her face with cold water and stood for a moment staring at her reflection. Don't get fazed, she murmured to herself. She returned to the interview room to find Steve sitting on a table with a foot braced against the wall, which he appeared to be staring at with great intensity. What now, then? She said. Well, what do you think? I think we bring in Finch and give him the 3rd degree. Don't give up, do you, Bryony? I like that about you, but you are a bit pig-headed sometimes. Look, I'm the one who's been at the coalface throughout this case, and I'm not going to consider it closed because we've got a half-crazed drug addict to confess on cue. There are other people involved. Edwards and Croydon, and they're both dead. Finch. I agree. But we've got nothing to pin on him. If he's behind the drug dealing, Scotland Yard will bring the net around him. It's the best way to ensure a prosecution. She took out the poetry book she'd borrowed from the museum. What about this, then? Steve opened it and stared at the picture of the tree, then flicked through, stopping, just as Bryony had done, on the last page. So what do you make of it? She asked. Mixture of dog Latin and fancy names, with maybe the odd French word thrown in. He swung his feet to the floor. Let me show it to Macready. We might make a bit of use of this with Gill. Just then a sergeant poked his head through the door. Message for you two. We've located Gill's van. DCS says take a break till 5:30 so we can get a preliminary report in. Bryony went to find Elsingham, who was sitting at a desk in the main office with his hand around a coffee mug and his mouth around a wedge of sponge cake. All right for some, she said. You should have seen the trolley going in for Macready. Elsingham pointed to one of the closed doors at the far end of the room. He's been treated like royalty. Pure Assam tea in a fancy pot, with salmon sandwiches and shortbread biscuits specially brought in from the High Street bakery. And there's a plate for you over there. The fingerprinting ritual now seemed almost superfluous. If Gill hadn't already confessed, the contents of his van would have done it for him. Croydon's shoes, wallet and watch, a pile of jagged flint rocks, a blood-stained parka,
but there was still nothing to incriminate Finch. Macready returned to the room looking stern but cool. "Very well, Williams. Latham has persuaded me to let you have your head, if you'll forgive the expression. You may begin the questioning, and you'd better sit here." He indicated the middle seat behind the table. Gill was brought in wearing a knitted blue sweater and trousers that were several inches too short for him. He really was a tall man, 6'4" at least, with long, powerful bones. He sat hunched as before, his handcuffed wrists lying inert on his lap. "Adrian," said Bryony, "you went to visit James Edwards at Thelema in Boar's Hill. Do you know what Thelema means?"
The whole of the law."
Gill mumbled the words as if he were reciting a dimly remembered catechism. "Who told you about that?"
"Smith."
"Did William Finch tell you about the law of Thelema?"
"Smith's law."
"Do you know William Finch?" There was a prolonged silence, and Gill's mouth slid into an odd, lopsided shape. "Have you ever seen William Finch at Thelema?" Silence. "Or anywhere else?" Bryony pushed the poetry book towards Gill, opened at the image of the tree. "Does that mean anything to you, Adrian?" He glanced at it, then immediately averted his eyes and fixed them on the strip of now darkened window. She tried another tack. "When we last talked to you, we asked you what day it was, and you said Mabon. What do you know about Mabon?"
"He comes."
"Who comes?"
"The visitor."
"And who's that? Tell us about him." Macready cut across the question.
"Let me read you something," he said, picking up the book. "It is from a charming little piece entitled Visitors." He began to read the lines in a resonant voice. "Akaldama heru raha, ihi aud, rihu asmode, rihu zagan, zagan salutor, nihi nada quornius berith gusion, vazagu salutor." A spasm seemed to pass through Gill's body, which jerked itself from the seat and lurched forward as a noise like a flock of crows issued from his mouth. It all happened in a split second. He threw the table over so it fell on Bryony as she was knocked backwards in her chair. Steve made a grab for his arm, but was somehow spun sideways and hurtled over the corner of the table, letting out a prolonged scream of pain. Gill's joined hands were raised to strike down at him, but Macready had reacted at lightning speed and stepped round the other side of the table to take Gill in a headlock. The two of them swayed and twisted together, until Gill spun free and thrust Macready against the wall, crushing the handcuff link into the side of his face. By now the room was full of people. 2 officers held Gill's arms and 2 dived for his legs, bringing him down to the floor, where he continued to howl and thrash till he was taped up like an Egyptian mummy. Even then he seemed to be an overpowering force in the room. As his limbs were constrained, his face became more and more contorted, and his voice was a deafening onslaught. Bryony went over to Steve, who was doubled up on the floor, clutching his shoulder. The arm that should have been attached to it was now wrenched aside, somewhere around the back of his neck. A uniformed officer crouched on his other side and put a thumb on the wrist of the injured arm. "No pulse," he said. "Could be dislocated. Keep him still." A stretcher was brought in while Gill was being hauled away, and ambulance staff arrived a few minutes later. Bryony felt a wave of nausea and giddiness come over her as she pulled herself upright again, leaning heavily on the side of the upturned table. Constable Shipway's approaching face swam before her eyes. Somewhere else in the room, Macready was mopping blood from the side of his face with a handkerchief, and still the howling noise tore through the building. Chapter 37. Monday, 29 September, 1974. The second interview with Wade was postponed till Monday, and on Sunday afternoon Finch returned home to find a police reception. He'd agreed to be interviewed at his house in Smeaton on Monday morning, with his solicitor present. Steve had his shoulder bandaged to a splint, and obviously found the drive down something of an ordeal, but he was determined to go through with it, and put up stoically with Elsingham's jokes about turning the tables.
Macready drove down separately with Canning. Outside the house, 2 cars were parked, a black MG and a silver Porsche. Elsingham whistled.
Just think, Gill did all the dirty work and all he got for it was an old combi van and a ride in Croydon's Morris Minor.
Finch came to the door wearing a grey suit and greeted them as if they had arrived for a business meeting. He recognised Bryony.
Detective Inspector. I guessed your profession correctly when I met you at the museum.
They were shown into the formal sitting room, where another man in a suit rose to greet them.
My solicitor, Malcolm Stevenage.
Tea and biscuits had been laid out, and some moments were taken up with the ritual of filling and handing out cups. Macready was obviously going to take his time before starting in with the questions, and Finch made no attempt at small talk. His movements were steady and precise. There was an intensity in his gaze and a level of alertness in his manner that didn't leave any scope for casual exchange. To Bryony, it wasn't exactly ease that he communicated, more like control. He was someone used to being in charge, and he'd arranged the seating so that he had his back to the window, an old trick favoured in the CID for domestic interviews. If possible, get your back to the window so they're facing you. That way all the light's on them, and they can't see your face as well as you can see theirs. No such option was left open. In silhouette, Finch looked bulky without being fat, but his head seemed almost too big for him, with its mass of wiry grey hair. The flesh of his face had a thickened look and dropped to a crumpled jawline.
I was not here yesterday to assist with your inquiries, he said, taking his place, and I must admit to being rather put out about having my property searched in my absence. Was that necessary?
We have had to make a number of searches on warrant in this case, said Macready. It is of a most serious nature.
A valuable armchair has been removed from my spare room. When can I expect that to be returned?
As soon as our forensic checks have been completed.
Very well. Let's get on with this, shall we? Mr. Stevenage and I have business to attend to.
Macready scribbled something in his book, then looked up and met Finch's gaze. You were in Manchester for the weekend, is that right?
I travelled up on Friday by train. The seat was booked in advance, first class, in my name, and my business contact would vouch for my whereabouts over most of that time.
He handed over a card with the details printed on it. Macready studied the card, then crossed his legs and looked around the room.
Have you lived here long, Mr. Finch? Doctor, I did my research at the University of Bologna, and to answer your question, 5 years.
Do you also own a house called Thelema in Boars Hill, near Oxford?
Yes. My father had it built before I was born, and I inherited it at the age of 9, when he died of a heart attack. I've lived there intermittently, but not since I bought this house.
It was you who installed the laboratory in Thelema.
I'm a chemist. As a young researcher, I did a great deal of work there. I understand it's now proving useful to other young scientists. Thelema is leased through an agency.
To Mr. James Edwards. He was found dead on Saturday morning. Finch was aware that he was under intense scrutiny from all 3 of them at this point, but there were no indications that he felt the pressure.
At Thelema?
At his house in Summertown. Were you acquainted with him?
Not really. He was just a tenant.
Do you know a Mr. Leonard Croydon?
He's a former student of mine.
A student where?
A private student. I have a number of them.
Mr. Croydon is a mathematician. You're a chemist. What did you teach him?
Geometry. I studied geometry at the University of Alexandria.
Was a Mr. Kevin Donnelly also one of your students?
Many years ago.
And what did you teach him?
He was interested in Giordano Bruno's memory system. I did some work on adapting it for modern use.
You're something of a polymath.
I'm merely committed to tapping the unused potential of the human mind.
Latham winced as he shifted in his chair.
You look as if you need some painkillers, said Finch.
He got up, opened a drawer in an elegant wooden cabinet, and took out a bundle of small boxes held with a rubber band. Extracting one of these, he handed it to Latham. "Standard over-the-counter ingredients, I assure you, but I'm in the process of patenting the formula. It also assists in the reduction of swelling." "Dr. Finch, when did you last see Leonard Croydon?" asked Macready. "Sometime in June." "Was it you who recommended him as a tutor to Dr. Colin Gleeson?" "Quite probably. I've recommended him to a number of people I've met in Oxford." "You've had no communication with Mr. Croydon since June?" "Not that I can recall." Macready sipped tea, watching Finch over the rim of the cup, then took his time returning it to the saucer. "Yes or no, Dr. Finch? I'm sure you're a man with an excellent memory." "A good memory is one that is well managed, not used to store unnecessary trivia." "Would you describe your association with Mr. Croydon as trivial?" "Far from it. He was one of my most impressive students, but he's no longer a student of mine. I'm afraid I can't help at all with his recent whereabouts." "That's unfortunate. We have grave concerns for his safety. Do you know a young man called Adrian Gill?" "I know of him. Let's say he's crossed my path." "What does that mean?" said Bryony. "I tried to help him once, about a year ago. He made an exhibition of himself at one of the pubs in Wantage, where I happened to be having a quiet drink. It was obvious he was in a bad way, and it looked like some kind of drug-induced psychosis. After a short while he collapsed, and a doctor was called. I was able to assist with his treatment." "How?" "I gave advice on the prescription. I have particular experience in psychiatric treatment. You can check my credentials with Guy's Hospital, where I am still an occasional consultant." There was a pause, and Macready made a play of arranging his papers. "Mr. Gill has been making use of your house in Boars Hill, Dr. Finch. Recently. As I explained, that house is rented out. Perhaps you'd care to ask the agents whether there has been an intruder." "An intruder?" "Gill is a man who observes no boundaries. He has intruded on my property here more than once. Something of a coincidence, is it not, that he should be making a nuisance of himself in both places?" Macready fixed Finch with a steady gaze, and Finch stared back. "You would have to ask him about that. Perhaps you'd be so good as to give us the particulars of his intrusions here." "It first happened shortly after the occasion I've described. I'd been in London for a few days and returned here late in the evening to find the front door open. I tried to switch on the light, but there was no electricity. The mains box is by the back door, but on my way through I was confronted by a figure standing in the hallway. I might have walked straight into him, but for the fact that there was a full moon and enough light coming through a back window to reveal his silhouette. It was not a pleasant encounter." "And it was repeated?" "I had new locks put on the doors, but a few weeks later he got in through one of the downstairs windows." "What was his mission?" Macready asked. "Looking for drugs, I suspect, since he knows I'm a chemist. But I keep nothing here that would be of interest to him." Macready sifted through his notes again. "Perhaps it's another kind of interest that draws him. You are an antiquarian, Mr. Finch. I've an interest in local folklore, as your young colleague here is aware. Certain aspects of the local folklore seem to have captured Adrian Gill's imagination. The Feast of Mabon, for example. Where might he have learned about that?" "From the Druids. They're not real Druids, of course. A milk and water version." "Gill's version of the legend suggests a rather stronger concoction than milk and water. He mentioned something about a visitor. What would he have meant by that?" It was Finch's turn to draw out the pause and to defy Macready to break eye contact. When he began to speak, it was as if there were only the two of them in the room. "The modern mind thinks of time as continuous. In the ancient world, it was not so. Changes of the seasons represented breaks in time, when one cycle ended and another began. Those breaks were marked by days that fell out of time altogether. Terrifying days,
when the worlds of the living and the dead opened on to each other and visitations occurred between them. Mabon was the original visitor. There's a belief that he still comes and goes, looking to dissolve the boundary by taking fresh blood back to the underworld. Macready took out the poetry book. "My father's book? Where did you get that from?" "I have it on loan. Here is a poem on the subject of visitors." He began to read. "Akeldama heru raha, ihi aud, erihu asmode, erihu zagan, zagan salutor, nihi nagaphornias berith gusion." "I wouldn't go declaiming that in your bedroom if I were you," said Finch. "Young Gill was certainly quite stirred up by it. Omnes abstrudo de fixa sunt." Whoever wrote it was evidently trying to fix something other than his Latin. Demons are said to be polylingual, though Enochian is their preferred language. Rumour has it, Superintendent Macready, that my father raised demons and was much the worse for the experiment, so tried to devise a formula for sending them back. Apparently it didn't work. They may be raised by incantation if the circumstances are right, but, like witches, they can only be bound by fire. And a powerful demon, once raised, will not return to its domain without taking mortal lives with it. Some take lives in the moment of their arrival. My father died of a heart attack, which, when I was a child, I was told, was caused by a particularly nasty visitation. Raising demons. What is your view of such experiments?" Finch exchanged a brief look with Stevenage. "Such experiments are not against the law, sir. The judiciary no longer believes in demons, and so does not legislate against the raising of them. I'll answer your question this far. Knowledge is command, and there are some things of which our world has grown ignorant. Visitors make their appearance. Would you have them lead us by the noses like asses? A man might seek vengeance on the demons themselves by enslaving them. It is my view that their power should be reckoned with." "What kind of power are we talking about?" asked Steve. Finch turned his gaze back on Macready as he responded. "Chaos. The howling forces of the maelstrom. Its god has the face of an ass and spiked curling antlers. Symbolically, it's an expression of the rise of energies from bestial form into widening spheres." Steve looked twitchy. No wonder, thought Bryony. He was in pain and probably dying for a cigarette. But it was not that kind of twitchiness. "You're a scientist," he said. "Why involve yourself with that kind of thinking?" "What does it mean to be a scientist? Our purpose is the knowledge of causes and secret motions of things, and enlarging the bounds of human empire to the effecting of all things possible." Who said that? Francis Bacon, the man who inspired the founders of our precious Royal Society. What is knowledge? What is it that we most want to know? You've come here with many questions. I could go on giving you answers, but where does this lead? Again, the challenge seemed to be thrown exclusively at Macready. Bryony could feel a long silence coming on. She dropped her own gaze to the second hand on her watch. 30, 60, 90 seconds. 2 minutes. 2 minutes could be a torturously long time, and it was too much for Steve. "Excuse me," he said. "I'll have to go outside for a minute." She saw him through the window as he left the house and went over to talk to Elsingham, who remained in the driver's seat of the car. At last, Macready spoke. "Mr. Finch, I'm seeking to determine the connections between certain events, all of which appear to be inspired by folkloric beliefs. The other thing they have in common is that they all involve Adrian Gill. We have this man in custody, and he has gone to some lengths to demonstrate that he is a maniac. But you see, I find myself in doubt about that. Murder and mayhem go hand in hand, but this is the first time I have encountered a man who presents himself as mayhem personified. Is it a role he is playing? Has someone trained him in it? And if so, for what purpose? This, perhaps, is what I most wish to know, at this present juncture. But, like you, I have some skills in finding out the answer to my own questions. So for the present, I merely pose them as rhetorical. I suggest you talk to the man who calls himself Wade. The milk and water druid. Did you know Wade is the name of Wayland the smith's father? The giant Wade sleeps under the mountain, waiting for the day of revenge. Put to the druid some of the questions you have put to me. My interest in folklore is no secret, but I'm not the only one capable of giving tuition in the subject. Now, Detective Chief Superintendent Macready, I do hope I have your title correct. If you'll excuse me, I've business to discuss with my solicitor.
Chapter 38.
I have no doubt that Finch is involved, said Macready. He has virtually told us as much, with his little lecture on demonology. Clearly he's confident we'll be unable to make a case against him. Steve nodded. Yeah, very smart. It's like he's taunting us by telling us things he knows we can't use. But I'm not sure how to read that. Maybe he's confident, but I actually think he's quite rattled. He must know Claire's the one who provided us with the lead to his house. He can only guess how much else she might remember. It was a good tactic not to mention Claire in the interview. Keep him guessing. Of course, she's pretty much useless to us as a witness now. But he can't be sure of that. Still, I think you're right, sir. As things stand, we've got no case against him.
They were sitting in the interview room at Reddleton, where Wade was due to join them. Bryony was trying to keep her cool. If we let Finch go, it's only a matter of time before the next victim gets picked. We can't say we've closed the case, not honestly.
Be realistic, Bryony. The important thing is to get Gill behind bars. He's the one who's responsible for all the violence. You've got no grounds for thinking it's going to continue after he's been put away. Besides that, the rest of Finch's backup team has been wiped.
How do we know? We don't have any idea how many of these so-called students might be under his influence. Who gave him the alibi in Manchester?
As a matter of fact, Macready intervened, it was the owner of a tabloid newspaper with whom he was discussing an advertising contract. Oh boy, said Steve. So we don't want to go poking around in that corner if we can help it. Types like that can smell a front-page story a mile off.
Bryony was trying to keep to her train of thought. Who held Edwards down while Gill broke his neck? What if Finch was actually there? And he tried to recruit Claire? He isn't going to let up. So neither can we. Just think what we've got against him. Donnelly's statement shows how it all connects up through him.
As I've said before, a good defence counsel would have Donnelly for breakfast. He's the one known to be practising hypnotism, on the record, and he admits to having been a cocaine addict.
He does not. Bryony's voice was rising in pitch. He admits to having taken it. That's different.
Try persuading a jury.
The point is, they connect up.
Maybe they do. But how are you going to prove it?
Finch got Croydon his job with the Gleasons.
Proves nothing.
Gill's been in 2 different houses owned by Finch. Finch admits that. Let's say that the beginning of the story he told us is true. Finch finds himself face to face with a young psycho in his house at night. Opportunity. This is the perfect recruit for his experiment. It adds up. Circumstantial evidence.
It's a patchwork. It will be ripped to shreds in court.
Claire remembers the room in the house at Smeaton.
After she's been debriefed by a druid in a long barrow. Come on, Bryony. Just imagine her in the witness box. Possible brain trauma, probable hallucinations. Think she's psychic, and she never even saw Finch.
Macready had been sitting back, looking through his notes. He slapped them down on the table and made some sharp percussion with the end of his pencil.
Put away the hammer and the tongs, if you please. For the present, we need to concern ourselves with Gill. I understand our druid has some acquaintance with him.
I don't know how much, said Bryony.
Gill may be getting his mythological notions from more than one source. That's true.
Steve came in a bit too keenly.
What if it's Wade who filled his head with all that guff about Mabon and Wayland the Smith?
We may find out about that shortly.
Gill's mental condition is what's exercising my attention. That outburst yesterday may have been calculated.
Steve returned to his seat at the table. Go in for an insanity plea, you mean? Quite possible. But that doesn't mean he isn't insane, if you follow me. The psychopathology of hysterical conditions is full of paradoxes. Patients can be quite strategic about when and where they let rip. I can't see how we can counter any insanity plea, quite frankly. And of course, it also means he's useless as a witness against Finch. We'll return to this discussion later, said Macready. We have an interview to conduct. Wade entered the room and took his time getting seated, shifting the angle of the chair so that it was side on, and draping one arm over the back as he crossed his legs and turned towards them. Mr. Bowman, Macready began, as I told you last time, it's Wade. A name with a legend attached to it. The giant Wade is the father of Wayland the Smith. And that's right, Wade's an Earth Guardian. You call yourself a druid, is that correct? I am a druid, yes. Macready's right eyebrow arched sharply. The oldest profession in Britain? And how long have you been part of it? One way and another, 30 years. You've studied the myths and folklore of these parts. You teach it to others. That kind of thing's not taught. It's learnt from experience. If you spend enough time in the places it belongs to, gradually you start to understand. Doesn't do to just try to work it out with your head. I see. Much of this lore is quite sinister, is it not? It's about vengeful gods, heads being crushed, devilish creatures in search of prey, visitations from the land of the dead, curses of the evil eye. Why would a man spend his time with such imaginings? Wade shook his head, staring at the wall in front of him. This provoked Macready into winding up the attack. Is there no answer you can give, sir? On the basis of your 30 years' experience, I would have thought you could manage a few words. It's not a matter of what answer I can give. It's a matter of what answer you can take. I'm trying to think how we can get onto the same wavelength. That will not be necessary, Mr. Bowman. Please just answer the questions. Let me put it another way. Legends such as that of Mabon and Wayland the Smith can be dangerous in their effect on young minds. Do you feel no sense of responsibility for that? Oh, I take responsibility. There's a lot of young minds I've rescued from places most people wouldn't know you could get to. There's talk about the world getting smaller. The world's as big as it's ever been. It's just that we've learned to live small lives in it. For young minds, that's not enough sometimes. They want to go adventuring, and when they get out there, they find things they're not ready to cope with. That's when they need help. Help in the form of lurid stories. What would you have to say about this? Macready was holding Sean's drawing of the Mabon mask. He handed it to Wade, who studied it closely. Who did this? Sean Adderley, said Macready. I thought as much. He takes drugs, and is a pawn in some ugly game of masquerade. We found the mask used to inspire his vision. The mask's traditional. Who was wearing it? Adrian? The evidence points to him. We've yet to question him about that particular episode. I could hear what was happening when you tried to talk to him over at Marlborough the other night. I was waiting outside, and I thought I should have warned you. He's still channeling. Channeling! Macready spat the word out contemptuously. Explain what you mean by that. Wade stood up. Am I being accused of something? Please sit down, Mr. Bowman. You're helping us with our inquiries. Well, I'm wondering what kind of help you think you want, because if you go on like this, I'm not going to be much use to you. That's what I mean about wavelength, see? He sat again, looking steadily at Macready. I'm sure you've been in your profession as long as I've been in mine, and I'm sure you'd have a bit of difficulty explaining the finer points of it to a complete outsider. Macready drew an audibly exasperated breath, as if about to interrupt, but evidently thought the better of it. Wade continued, So you might give me a bit of leeway, since what you're asking for is trade secrets, so to speak. He picked up the drawing again.
the face of chaos and darkness. Mabon, Baphomet, Satan, Pan. The beast god has different guises. He's out there on the prowl, waiting for whoever tries hard enough to contact him. You know the story of Dracula? He can't get into your house unless he tricks you into inviting him. Well, that's pretty much how it is. Once you've contacted the visitor, you can become the channel for all that power. When that's happened, you don't last long unless you find a way of closing it off. That's where the stories can help, see, because they can be shared. Someone coming back from an experience like that has been ripped out of the human world. They've got no way to explain what's happened to them. Maybe they tried to tell someone about it, and all they get back is this word, believe. I don't believe you. How am I supposed to believe that? That's the common reaction. He looked at Bryony. I don't use the word believe because it lets people off the hook. I go by what I know, through my eyes and my ears and all those other senses human beings have been blessed with. And when people come to me with their eyes staring so hard they can't see anything around them, and their mouths so dry they can't speak, with sweat on their face and the breath sticking in their throat, I know something's happened to them. Maybe they've gone looking for it. Maybe it's come to find them. Maybe somebody who knows a bit too much has deliberately led them into the way of it. One thing I will say, if there's somebody with a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience who's stirring up chaos, I hope you don't think you can bang it up in a jail cell and everything will settle down nicely afterwards. Macready had been sitting through this with his arms folded and a deep frown on his face. Now the frown lines undulated, as if they were trying to decide what reaction to set in place. We cannot put chaos in the dock, Mr. Bowman, though I sometimes wish we could. I am in the business of tracking down human mischief-makers and putting them behind bars, and that is exactly what I intend to do in this case. Now, to return to Adrian Gill. What do you mean, sir, when you say he is channeling? Someone's been filling his head with ideas that have pushed him over the edge. You knock on his skull, and there's no one home. Wade demonstrated, tapping his forehead with his knuckles. But something's doing some thinking for him. There's an old saying, evil the mind that is held by no head. When thoughts and intentions get in here, he tapped his forehead again, that don't belong to you, then you're in trouble. Yes, Steve interrupted. It's called paranoia. What about hypnotism? Asked Bryony. You can plant ideas in someone else's mind that way, to influence them, make them do what you want. Of course. But hypnotism can also be a way of opening someone up to the mind that isn't anyone's. That's really bloody dangerous. That's really bloody paranoid, muttered Steve. Use that word if it's more comfortable for you, said Wade. But let me tell you something. I had a talk with Adrian about a year ago, after I found him out on Smith's Ridge. It's one of the most isolated parts of the Ridgeway, Smith's Ridge. He was up there talking to someone, and when they saw me coming, the other man walked up over the hill out of sight. He'd been meeting Adrian every day out there, helping him to open his mind. Those were the words Adrian used. But to what? I asked him. What are you opening your mind to? He started turning around on the spot, with his arms stretched out like a dervish, and he got faster and faster and faster, and that noise came out of him like I heard down at the police station the other night. And I could feel it, a field of force all around him. He'd have killed anyone who got in his way. I waited till it passed, and then he was just like a zombie, standing there, staring into space. Who was the other man? Asked Macready. Couldn't get Adrian to tell me. He'd been threatened with all kinds of horrors if he told anyone about the meetings. It's my view the other man was using him as a guinea pig, to see what he could tap into. I told Adrian to stay away from him. Couple of times when I've seen Adrian since, he's avoided my eye. He was in too deep. You could make a guess as to the identity of this other man, I suspect. Oh, I could do that, yes. William Finch. He's the only person I know with as much knowledge of the law as me, and I wouldn't want to cross his path. Do you have any evidence that he was seeing Adrian Gill? Police-type evidence? No, I don't. Finch is too shrewd to leave his footprints behind, and if he's attracting too much interest from you lot, he'll just move abroad for a while. He comes and goes.
Macready stood up.
Thank you, sir, for your time. We may need to talk to you again in the next few days. Oh, you'll need me. That's for sure.
Chapter 39.
Look, said Steve, this is all perfectly explicable in terms of ordinary human psychology. Supernatural belief has been variously interpreted in the clinical literature.
He addressed Macready, who was still sitting at the table making notes.
Has anyone started going back through the case files on those 2 little girls from Bishopstone? The Wiltshire DCI is reassessing them. I had the conversation with him first thing this morning and expect a further report later today.
Macready looked at his watch.
And Dr. Pavantanandan is due here to talk to us now. Go and see if he's arrived, Williams.
As soon as Bryony went into the barn, she was waylaid by Shipway.
Inspector, I've been trying to find you. I'm afraid Claire and Hannah have parted company with us. They've been giving us the runaround all morning. First, they scarpered off while we were in a briefing at Marlborough Station. We found them over by Fifield Down, near where Mr. Finch's house backs onto it. We managed to get them out of the area, but just now they announced they've had enough of Wiltshire and they're going home to Oxford.
Thanks for letting me know, said Bryony. Now we've got Adrian Gill in custody, I don't think they're in much danger. I'll get the Oxford patrols to keep an eye on their movements once they arrive back. Pavan made his appearance in an overcoat, with his lab coat on underneath, carrying a fat briefcase. He was prepared with a brisk report for Macready.
With regard to Dr. Finch's house, I'm afraid it's all down to what my team like to call the 3 F's, sir. Fingerprints, footprints, and fibres. According to the information Inspector Williams gave us, Claire Belmont was barefoot. This should enhance our chances of finding footprints. But the floor of the room to which she was taken is coarse, unsurfaced wood. The graining is too deep and uneven to hold a print of any kind. She is supposed to have been offered a cup of milk. Someone has been assiduously washing up in Finch's kitchen. Nothing there is of any help to us. Which leaves us with the chair Belmont claims to have sat in. It's a fine piece, as a matter of fact. A Sheraton wing chair, covered in dark brown velvet, with a curved channel back. This means it is in contact with the upper body, from shoulder to shoulder. And velvet is especially good at attracting and retaining fibres. Even so, we may be out of luck. The coat Belmont wore is reversed hide, and of very high quality, so its surface is quite fine. What we did find, though, are these.
He brought out an exhibit bag, containing a scattering of long fibres. Flecks of pinkish colour were just visible among them.
Mohair fibres, which are longer than those of ordinary wool. Someone has been sitting in that chair wearing a woolen garment that has a lot of mohair in it, with bright pink and purple strands. It would be a conspicuous sort of garment. Unless that's relevant to us, I suggest we return the chair. It's a valuable item of furniture, and Finch's solicitor has already been making inquiries about it.
What were those 2 girls wearing? Asked Steve. They could have been taken to Finch's house. Macready picked up the phone. They all waited in silence as he was put through to the DCI with the case files for the Bishopstone children, and his face gave nothing away in response to whatever he was hearing from the other end. At last he covered the receiver with his hand and looked up.
A woolen cardigan, hand-knitted, in a colour known as fuchsia. It was Jessica Parks's birthday present.
He scribbled on a piece of paper and handed it to Bryony.
The address of Mrs. Parks. Go and see her immediately.
The house was a small red brick terrace with a front door that faced directly onto the pavement. It was opened by an elderly woman in thick spectacles, who took some time studying Bryony's ID card.
"I suppose you'd better come in. I'm Beth Anderson, Jessica's grandmother. My daughter's gone over to do the shopping in Swindon. She won't be back till this afternoon. They only have the buses once an hour now."
Bryony was shown through to a neatly furnished sitting room with flowered wallpaper and lace covers on the arms of the sofa. A bulging knitting basket in the corner immediately caught her eye.
"Sit yourself down, then,"
said Mrs. Anderson.
"I'll make the tea."
Judging from the pace of her movements, tea was going to be a slow business.
"Really," said Bryony, "there's no need. I'm very sorry to have to open up painful memories for you, but there's just one thing I need to know about Jessica, and I think you might be able to help me."
"I'll do my best."
She sat, took her spectacles off, and began to clean them with a linen handkerchief from the knitting basket.
"Is it you who does the knitting, Mrs. Anderson?"
"Oh, yes. I knit for the whole family, except Bobby. He's getting to be a bit of a tearaway, and he'll only wear those tracksuit things with Superman pictures on them. Bobby is Jessie's little brother. He's 6. And there's Fiona, who's 10. Very fashion-conscious, she is."
"Did you knit a cardigan for Jessica in a lovely fuchsia colour?"
Mrs. Anderson's eyes watered immediately.
"That's what she was wearing the day she got lost. I knitted it for her birthday. We chose the yarn together up at the wool shop in Marlborough. It was beautiful to knit with because of the mohair. I've still got some left in the chest upstairs. I was going to knit a scarf with it, but I hadn't the heart. It would just remind me all the time."
She shuffled off to fetch it, and Bryony got up to look around the room. Everywhere there were photos of Jessica Parks, as a toddler riding her tricycle, blowing out candles on a birthday cake, carrying her baby brother, clowning around on roller skates. Bryony resumed her seat as she heard the old woman coming back down the stairs.
"I'll keep one ball as a souvenir. You can have the others."
She handed Bryony a plastic carrier bag, which contained a knitting pattern for a child's cardigan and 2 balls of fluffy wool with strands of brilliant pink, purple and blue twisted together.
"It's really pretty,"
said Bryony. Mrs. Anderson sat down heavily in the fireside chair.
"That's why I can't bear to look at it."
"I'm so sorry, Mrs. Anderson."
Bryony put a hand on her arm.
"Jessie chose the wool herself, you said?"
"We picked it out together."
"I'm glad about that."
She held a ball of the wool in her hand, feeling its springy softness.
"Because this is what's going to put the guilty man behind bars."
Bryony arrived back at the Reddleton barn, half crying, half laughing. She felt completely wrung out. When she tipped the wool out of the carrier bag onto the table in front of her colleagues, Steve shouted, "Bingo!" Pavan clapped, and Macready pulled out one of the bright threads across the palm of his hand. "So," he said, "this spells the end of the road for William Stanton Finch." Steve perched on a corner of the table. "This is going to be some court case. It'll be a challenge to keep all the druidry out of it, but we should be fine. If we stick to the forensic evidence, we've got him. I take it we charge him with being an accessory to the first 2 murders." "I intend to charge him with everything," said Macready. "Lock, stock and barrel." "How are you going to make it stick?" "I'm going to take the entire story to court and open up Pandora's box, Latham. That is my intention." "But what about the witnesses? Claire Belmont, Kevin Donnelly, Adrian Gill." "I really wouldn't advise it, sir. We'd be all over the front pages and the defence would have a field day. You can bet Finch will be buying the best silk in London. Our key witness will be Wilfred Bowman, a solid citizen who milks his cows at dusk, serves on his local council, and is prepared to steer through the murkier realms of the story without embarrassment. I never thought I would take my hat off to a druid, but I do so unreservedly. You're not telling me you give credence to all that evil mind stuff, are you, sir?" "The issue is not whether you or I give credence to it, Latham, or whether the Director of Public Prosecutions, the judge, or the jury give credence to it. The issue
is whether such notions were behind the terrible sequence of events that has taken place. Let that be enough for all of us.
Chapter 40. Macready was spelling out the plan for Finch's arrest when an officer came to the door to say that someone called Hannah Jensen was on the phone asking for Inspector Williams. Bryony marched through to the barn, cursing under her breath. "Bryony? You're supposed to call me Inspector Williams."
Stuff that. We're being followed.
"What? Where are you?"
At a pub in Kingston Bagpuys. The Partridge.
I noticed this black MG behind me just after we got through Farringdon, and I thought, I've seen that before on one of the roundabouts near Swindon. Bit sus, I thought. So I did a little test. I turned right and made a detour through Southmore, and it came after me quite close up, as if we were meant to see it. So we stopped at the pub here. It's parked outside now.
"Can you give me the number plate?"
DWL 992.
"And can you describe the driver?"
There's two of them in there. Driver's got a sort of a square face and black glasses, dark hair, going thin on top. And there's a big bloke whose face we couldn't see clearly.
"All right, Hannah. Stay there. Stay right where you are, and we'll get a car out there."
Just a minute.
Hannah seemed to have left the phone.
Elsingham!
Bryony yelled. "Get on to the police station at Kingston Bagpuys and tell them to send a car out to the Partridge immediately to detain 2 men in a black MG. Hannah's voice came back, breathless. "You there?" "Course I'm here. Where are you?"
It's all right. Claire thought they were leaving, but they're still there. No worries. We'll keep an eye on them for you.
"Don't do anything, Hannah. Just stay right where you are." She hung up, dialed the number for the Wiltshire control room, and asked them to contact the car watching Finch's house, and get the officers to check that he was still there. It was an agonizing wait for the response, and the woman on the control desk had an exasperatingly slow way of speaking.
"I got through to the car, Inspector. They saw the solicitor leave in his black MG at about 5. Mr. Stevenage, is that right?"
"That's right. What about Finch, the one they're supposed to be looking out for?"
"Well, the silver Porsche is still there. Sergeant Anthony says they didn't notice as anyone else was with Mr. Stevenage. They thought he'd left on his own. But now they can't get any answer from the house, so
"Tell them to get inside and search." She put down the phone and ran out to the cottage. Macready and Latham were making for the door before she'd finished reporting.
"What bloody game's he playing?" exclaimed Steve as they strode across the courtyard. "Sounds like they were deliberately trying to catch the attention of the 2 girls. It's a trap."
"If Hannah stays where she is, it'll be okay," said Bryony.
"Big if,"
muttered Steve. They drove in convoy at high speed through the fading daylight. Macready and Latham travelled in the first car, with Canning at the wheel. Bryony and Elsingham followed, and Shipway and Jeffries were in a third car.
"So, what's going on?"
asked Elsingham. "Hannah's been tailed by Finch and his solicitor."
"Trying to help us out by incriminating themselves, are they?"
"Latham thinks it's a trap," said Bryony.
Elsingham snorted. "How are they going to trap this lot?"
The 3 cars, speeding along with sirens wailing, felt like a force to be reckoned with, and the police from Kingston Bagpuys would already be on the scene. They were, but in the car park outside the Partridge there was no sign of an orange Mini or a black MG. Bryony half knew this would happen. Finch had lured Hannah and Claire to follow them. She got out as Macready came towards her, his unbuttoned coat flapping in the rising wind. "Boar's Hill," she said. "The turn-off's to the right, just a few miles up." This time Bryony and Elsingham took the lead, and as they approached Wootton, they spotted Hannah's car. The road was on a steep rise, and the Mini evidently wasn't coping too well, besides which it had no lights on. Elsingham cut neatly in front of it, blocking its path, and Bryony sprung out.
"I told you to stay put!"
she shouted. Claire got out, looking embarrassed.
"I'm sorry,"
she said.
"We thought we should see where they went, at least. For some reason it seemed the right thing to do."
Unable to trust her temper, Bryony made no comment. She directed both women into the back seat of the police car, which had now been overtaken by the others in the convoy. Elsingham caught up on the bend around John Mound, and the 3 cars drew up together in front of Thelema, now a dark shadow against the purple sky. The officers who were supposed to be on watch got out of their vehicle looking understandably alarmed and began spluttering their account to Macready. Yes, 2 men had gone into the house.
"We let them in, sir, I'm afraid. One of them had a solicitor's card, and the other one said he was the owner. Didn't see how we could refuse them. The solicitor came out again a couple of minutes ago and drove off."
Macready swept through the front door without answering. Bryony followed with Latham, Elsingham and Jeffries, and left Chipway to mind Hannah and Claire. Canning stayed on guard by the door. A light in the entrance hall revealed a sea of books and papers, tipped from the crates assembled there. The house seemed to be full of wind, which was lifting and stirring the papers and making a low, howling sound through the loose timbers. There were sounds of breaking glass from above, and Macready was already charging up the staircase. 2 seconds was enough to take in the scene in the laboratory. Shattered glass lay everywhere. The stick insect's case was smashed open, and there was no sign of its inhabitant. Bottles and jars had been swept from the shelves, and there was an acrid smell. Finch was nowhere to be seen, but there were noises above them. Footsteps.
"There's an attic,"
said Macready.
"According to the search report, there's an entrance above the main landing."
He sent the other 3 men to look for it, and instructed Bryony to follow him. Someone was walking directly above them, no doubt listening to what they said. There was stillness for a few moments, then the footsteps started again. Macready followed their direction, out of the laboratory and into the hallway, past the room where the boys had been held, round the corner into the passage that led to the end room where the statue of Pan was kept. There was no light here, but their torch beams showed that the door was slightly ajar. The footsteps had stopped, and the only noise was made by the wind, which filled the passageway, lifting Bryony's hair. They edged towards the door, and Macready kicked it open to reveal something that made the breath catch in her throat. A giant horned creature stood there, surrounded by an aura of sapphire blue light. Its eyes glowed orange, and with a strange twisting movement it arched its neck so that its head loomed towards them. She choked back an impulse to scream as Macready lunged at it, arms raised, and came away with a mass of sheet in his hands. The apparition had gone. Behind the sheet was the magic lantern, its 2 lenses emitting sharp beams of light.
"Tricks the frightened children," snapped Macready.
A voice came from above them.
"O Elvavini, od Zodakam, Ilasagai. Enough of your theatrics, Finch. We are not impressed."
"Only a little prelude. Come." More footsteps, leading back along the passage to where Latham and Jeffries were standing, their torches trained on the ceiling. There was a trapdoor, but too high up to be reached without a ladder. Elsingham had gone to find something to climb on.
"Finch!"
bellowed Macready. The response rang throughout the house.
"Dohi ape, Mikalazodo, Zodakame, Lirimji Mabon, Lirimji Baphomet."
There was silence, followed by a knocking that resounded through the building. Then the trapdoor opened, and what seemed at first to be a mass of black cloth dropped to the floor. Finch rose from the middle of it to stand before them, surrounded by an elaborately patterned black cloak, and with an arm clasped around the statue of Pan.
"Visitors,"
he said. He held out the statue as if to greet them, and their torch beams caught the snarl of its mouth, which, as they watched, began to issue tongues of blue flame, at first faint and transparent, then bursting into brilliant white fire as the wind whipped at them. In an instant the thing had turned into a blazing fireball. He lifted it high above his head, his hair catching alight from the falling sparks, as he shouted, "Oel kamame, do perege saloberozza!" A massive flash of light and heat seared through the air as he pitched the thing over into the stairwell, and a flame leapt from below. Finch, now alight from head to foot, moved slowly forward, reaching out his flaming arms to grasp Macready's coat, so it too caught fire. Instinctively, Bryony moved to help him, but as she got near, a blinding flash crossed her field of vision, and her glasses cracked. A furore of shouting and scuffling broke out as the air turned to smoke. She pulled the glasses off, but the after-image of the flash still blinded her. Using what little peripheral vision she had, she got hold of the banister and began to make her way down the staircase, 1 foot at a time. Somewhere in all the roaring and crashing, she heard Elsingham's voice shouting, "This way!" Her eyes were stinging fiercely, and everywhere there were sparks, which made glowing tails as she tried to look to one side or the other. "No, this way! This way!" Now she realized the stairs had come to an end, and she was standing over a smoke-filled abyss. A hand grasped her wrist, pulling her upwards. "It's all right. Come on. This way. Along here." Elsingham was coughing and gasping between the words as he guided her. She closed her eyes to try to stop the dizzying flashes, but it didn't make any difference. "I can't breathe," she thought, as if the fact was quite neutral to her, an almost calming realization from somewhere outside. "Come on," said Elsingham. "You can make it." Then the air seemed to get clearer. She knew there was an open window in front of her. "She can't see!" he shouted. "We'll have to lift her," said Macready's voice. There were hands grasping her upper arms from both sides. "Lift! Now!" came Macready's command, and she was raised in the air and found herself braced against the frame of the window. For a moment she felt she was standing in the middle of nothing, then someone far below called out. "OK, Bryony." It was Hannah. "When I say jump, take a breath and jump forward. Keep your knees relaxed and your feet in line. We'll get you. All right? Jump!" She stretched out her arms and launched herself into space. As they peeled the bandage from her eyes, one of the doctors was joking that they'd had to clear a whole ward at the Radcliffe for the Thames Valley Police. In fact, they were distributed all around the hospital. Macready had been released after 24 hours in the burns unit, but was being treated as an outpatient for first-degree burns to his face and neck, and more serious injuries to his hands. Elsingham, the last to jump, had broken an ankle when he half missed the blanket held out to catch him. Jeffries needed treatment for smoke inhalation, but was otherwise uninjured. Latham's shoulder had been further wrenched as he landed, and it had to be reset. Bryony didn't feel too bad, considering. The specialist was concerned that there might be some retinal damage from the fierce light and heat of what, she was told, had been a phosphorus explosion. She'd had to rest for a couple of days with a bandage over her eyes. Gareth had been to visit her twice, and brought some roses that the nurses told her were a beautiful yellow. It was strange holding hands with someone you couldn't see, but there was something absolutely right about his physical presence as he sat there reading to her from the newspapers. On the third day, Macready called an impromptu conference in the waiting room. Stevenage, the solicitor, had been apprehended and was prepared to talk. "He's claiming he was an accessory under duress," said Macready dryly. Steve scoffed. "Crap! What kind of duress?" "Something called a hostile current of will, Latham." "Good. I'll add to it. I'll wrap his armpit round his neck for him." "What's he prepared to talk about?" asked Bryony. "Finch's enterprise in all its aspects. Stevenage has been an acolyte, apparently, for some years. I'm going to hear his whole ugly story this afternoon, if any of you would care to join me. It promises to be almost as edifying as Finch's magic lantern show." Bryony excused herself and went to pack up her things. She raked together the array of toiletries and cosmetics that Hannah and Claire had brought in and took them to the bathroom, where she stared at her reflection in the mirror. "No," she said to it, "I'm not going to hear the whole ugly story. I'm going to find someone to cut my hair." Belinda Audio hopes you enjoyed the reading of The Visitor, written by Jane R. Goodall and read by Nikki Paul. If you would like further information about Belinda Audio, please visit our website www.belinda.com.